The evaluation official barked. What on earth is that supposed to be for a name? He was visibly stunned to see a mere adolescent stepping onto the field. He prepared to deliver a briefing regarding the upcoming examination. But the very instant the goblins materialized, a blur streaked across the arena and a monster's head went flying. Both beasts were neutralized in one lightning-fast strike. The veteran instructor was left completely speechless. He couldn't help but wonder who this mysterious kid actually was. Today marks the grand debut for the new player identification trials. And thus far, the seasoned pro hasn't been impressed by a single AI participant. They all struggled pathetically just to dispatch a few weakling goblins, scarcely able to maintain their footing under pressure. Even with a 2-on-1 advantage, they were too paralyzed by fear to advance, choosing instead to tuck tail and forfeit the match. The top performer only managed round 20, which was decent, but the bald man was now floored. The reason? Within 60 seconds, a literal ocean of monster remains surrounded the boy. The teenager was blitzing through stages faster than the eye could follow. His blade work was razor-sharp and his footwork was impossibly fluid, exhibiting a level of mastery that would make a great sword master look like an amateur. I'm finished. The system blares that the dreaded Test 49 is commencing. The earth begins to shudder and the very floor starts to splinter. Hold on a second. Folks, before we see the carnage, we need to know this kid's secret. In his former life, he commanded the world's most elite squad as the ultimate master, the legendary leader of the undisputed #1 guild. So how did he end up watching his comrades fall one by one, while he gasped for air on the brink of a cold, lonely death? He had shared a 15-year brotherhood with a blond man named Kaijuro, even gifting him a divine relic, a priceless artifact meant to keep him safe during this perilous raid, all for the sake of conquering the treacherous 8th floor. But as the final boss emerged and Narukami led the charge, diving headfirst into the fray alongside his trusted team, Kaijuro and his treacherous lackeys began to sneer, wearing the twisted grins of absolute madmen. The golden chance to wipe out the world's top guild had finally arrived, while the heroes were fully distracted by the monstrous threat, and the innocent healer was pouring her soul into keeping them alive. That best friend crept up from the shadows and drove a blade through her heart. But what could possibly drive this man to betray a hero like Narukami, when they were supposedly fighting on the same side to save humanity? 10 minutes later, Kaijuro is screaming about how much he loathed their charity. He was sick of existing as a mere footnote in Narukami's legend, drowning in the fame of the elite Blue Eyes Guild. But today, the hierarchy resets. That was the traitor's grand vision, but he wasn't prepared for the twist of fate. A trash can lid clatters onto the pavement, and a young boy crawls out from the filth of a dumpster, blinking at the sun, wondering if he has truly returned to Earth. He is now reborn as Hasoi Subaru, a low-level nobody, a person burdened with the painful memories of a world that dismissed him as a total failure. Not even a shadow of the legendary Subaru who perished 25 years ago. He quickly scours the web for any news on his old guild. Blue Eyes surprisingly still stands as a pillar of power, and the public believes the man carrying on his noble legacy is none other than the backstabber, Kaijuro. The path to vengeance is set, yet he is trapped at level 1, while his nemesis wields all the stolen glory and authority. Bolstered by 25 years of relentless leveling and legendary loot, he made a blood oath to make that snake remember exactly who the true king of the hunters really is. But how can he challenge the man who currently rules the entire industry? The blonde trader's malice started with a single seed of resentment. During that final raid, where the boss let out a world-shaking roar, Narukami nullified the entire shockwave with one effortless parry. As his team cheered for their savior, the poisonous envy, festering within Kaijuro, only grew more toxic. On that fateful day, the moment he executed the healer, and mocked her dying breath with a laugh, Subaru was being shredded by the boss, realizing Kaijuro acted out of pure spite. But if we look even further back, we discover that Villain was once a loyal member of Narukami's inner circle, before he walked away, claiming he had found a faster route to power. That route was paved with the blood of his mentor. Now, back in the present, the burning question remains. How can a level 1 rookie execute the most powerful man on the planet? Phase 1. Track down the survivors of Blue Eyes, starting at his own grave, while the mourning crowds offer prayers to a ceremonial mask, sculpted in the likeness of Subaru's face. He spots a magically shimmering flower resting on the casket. He lunges forward through the crowd, snatching the bloom as a realization hits him like a truck. This is the signature skill of one of his former comrades. On the day of the massacre, he used a whirlwind technique to scatter the bodies of his fallen friends, praying they might somehow cling to life. But if they did survive that hell, would they still stand by his side? Attacking without strength is a fool's errand. So before making his move, he must reclaim his prowess and his steel. Because in just 48 hours, the player trials will commence. The silver lining of Kaijuro's survival is that he's still around to be slaughtered. Now we're back at the high-stakes testing grounds. The second he hits the milestone of the 49th round, the arena convulses and the floor splits wide open. Hyuga bellows for him to retreat before it's too late, mocking him, asking if he thinks he's the second coming of Narukami Subaru. The Goblin King erupts from the depths, blinded by fury at the sight of the massacre of his fallen green-skinned horde. The instructor screams for a forfeit as the Titan lunges for the kill. Hasoi discards his broken blade and snatches iron spikes from a fallen mace, and hurls them with lethal precision directly into the beast's eyes. The massive king reels back in agonizing pain, and as the killing blow descends, Hasoi slips through the air, a grace learned from his old friend. Right there, if that had been my old training partner, I would have executed it with the exact same finesse. A lethal slice to the jugular followed by a barrage to the torso. The once invincible monarch was completely drained of strength. And just like that, the Titan collapsed face first into the dirt. Hasoi stepped forward composedly, unsheathed his blade, and delivered the final blow. You are officially the first warrior to slay the Goblin King and conquer stage 50. Still, Subaru is deeply unsettled that such a nightmare exists within a mere tutorial. Regardless, the teen's level began to skyrocket, granting him entry to the beginner's emporium. He holds 2,500 credits, but he's stunned to find high-tier treasures affordable even at his current rank. Several of these artifacts are legitimately world-class. Take the anonymous Demon Blade, for instance, a steal at 1,000 points. Subaru is tempted, though he knows its cursed skill hungrily devours the wielder's life force. Then there's the Holy Sword Miranda for 1,400. Its fatigue reduction buff makes it a smarter play than raw aggression. However, Subaru realizes neither option is optimal without a more strategic approach. While weighing his choices, a different peculiar item caught his eye. The appearance wager was available for 1,400 points, capable of nullifying negative gear and skill effects. The moment he saw it, all hesitation vanished. He purchased it instantly. Paired with the wager, he snatched up the Demon Blade as well. The math was simple. He could now wield the curse without sacrificing his health. Subaru felt a surge of triumph regarding his clever investment. The bald instructor admired the gear haul, but admitted he was still baffled by the strategy. He questioned why Subaru bought the wager, fearing it might become a useless trinket later on. Subaru shot back, asking if he was truly obligated to narrate his every thought. Predictably, Hyuga felt a stinging prick of wounded pride. Nevertheless, the veteran decided to let the cheekiness slide, conceding that he was clearly out of his depth. Secretly, Subaru chuckled at the irony of that scrawny kid becoming a high-ranking instructor. Years ago, Hyuga was just a wide-eyed fanboy, chasing him down for a signature. Subaru had been too busy to bother, leaving the boy weeping and desperately shouting his name. Evidently, the passage of time was brutal, claiming the poor guy's hair far too early. Subaru refused to elaborate further, demanding his trial scores stay classified, though his request was ignored. Hyuga insisted he would mold the boy into a model citizen of the community. He offered a spot in the prestigious Knights Guild. Subaru declined flatly, sending Hyuga into a frantic sales pitch about how incredibly blessed he was to have a personal mentor. Ignoring the noise, our protagonist simply turned and headed for the upper levels, leaving the dejected bald man standing in solitary disappointment. Moments later on the second floor, known as the Starting City, a vibrant bazaar was in full swing. Merchants were hawking their wares, but Subaru felt a heavy weight in his chest. He had been handed a miraculous, logic-defying opportunity, a rare second chance to rewrite the stars and fix his past. He possessed a staggering advantage, a golden ticket to reshape his destiny. This was for the brothers in arms he lost, and to see his vengeance through to the end. Deep within the Starting City lies a high-end private dojo. It's a sanctuary to calibrate skills or gear at no cost. The clerk directed him toward Gym 1. But the hero had his sights set higher, requesting entry to Training Bay 5. The elder tried to prevent the rookie from burning through his funds, but Subaru wouldn't budge. The man finally relented, grumbling that whatever happens inside is strictly on the kid's own head. Subaru handed over the 50-credit fee without blinking. In this world, the higher you climb, the more brutal the environment becomes. Naturally, the lower floors are designed as a safety net for the inexperienced. But our hero is no novice. He had calculated every move for the 5th tier difficulty. Once inside, Subaru gripped his newly acquired curse steel. The blade hummed, instantly recognizing the boy as its true sovereign. His combat stats surged upward, but the inevitable toll on his body began to manifest. His vitality and endurance started to drain away like sand in an hourglass. Suddenly, the greed skill triggered, flooding a portion of his strength back into his veins. Level 1 wasn't enough to fully stall the curse. The blade grew hungrier, cycling stats until he hit his breaking point. Without a moment's pause, he dropped 10,000 credits to evolve the skill to level 2. Now elevated to E rank, the ability could finally suppress the sword's lethal drawbacks. Even though it still nipped at his life force, his power levels reached a new peak. Ready to test his limits, he dove straight into the first gauntlet, throwing himself fearlessly into the rune's lethal mechanisms. A short while later, the receptionist had drifted off into a light slumber. He jolted as Subaru breezed past the front desk. Blinking his eyes open, he wondered if he'd seen a ghost, because the youth from before seemed to move with the speed of a lightning bolt. The clerk stood up, puzzled that the session had concluded in a mere 10 minutes. Driven by curiosity, he marched to room 5 and gave a firm knock. When no one answered, he cautiously pushed the door open. He was floored by the sight. The entire reinforced chamber was in ruins, obliterated as if a localized earthquake had torn through the foundations. The following morning, Subaru woke up with a groan and a long stretch. His muscles felt like they had been replaced by solid granite. He thanked his luck it was only a low-tier demon blade. A high-rank version would have broken him. As the exhaustion faded, Subaru felt his newfound power thrumming through his current vessel. In his previous state, even lifting such a cursed weapon would have been impossible. The synergy between his purchased skill and the blade was perfect, he realized that extreme. Greed would also provide a massive boost to his signature lightning abilities. The only hurdle was funding. The recent upgrade had left his pockets completely empty. Staring down a financial crisis, Subaru couldn't help but pity his own broke situation. Nearby, a man was entertaining a crowd, shouting about how nostalgic the atmosphere felt. It was a streamer who, after a massive donation from Alexander G., immediately doused himself in hot coffee for views. Subaru dismissed the guy as a lunatic, but a quick search revealed a shocking reality. Statistics showed that a staggering 1 in 3 players was now a full-time content creator. The system had integrated a live broadcast feature that converted engagement into real-world points. Suddenly, a familiar shadow loomed over him, mocking his presence. The newcomer sneered, calling it a joke that a pathetic worm like Subaru survived this far. Subaru felt a visceral, involuntary recoil. His body's cellular memory loathed this person. The bully barked at him for staying silent, and the hero realized his new body was paralyzed by ingrained terror. The protagonist's hands shook as he stammered that he had somehow scraped through. The guy sat down arrogantly, lamenting that the world was doomed if trash like him could pass the trial. He admitted quite openly that he had prayed the goblins would tear Subaru apart. Before the rebirth in the junkyard, the original boy had lived a nightmare of constant abuse. The tormentor justified his cruelty by simply labeling the boy as human garbage. He claimed even the boy's name was an eyesore and that he was too stupid to follow orders. Subaru tried to explain that his meager earnings weren't enough to cover the protection fees. In response, he took a brutal kick to the gut, and the bully spitefully shredded his only bag of food. He commanded the boy to rot in that landfill, threatening that if he ever showed his face again, he would receive a beating that would haunt him forever. These flashes of the past finally explained exactly why he had been discarded in a dumpster like broken glass. In the present moment, Isaac begins gloating about hitting level 20 and being the highborn heir of Reinhardt. He brags about mastering a B-rank skill, the absolute ceiling for the tutorial, so Subaru tosses him a hollow compliment. He then flatly declares that he's finished with the conversation and heading out. But the blonde bully snaps back, ordering the hero to fetch him a hot coffee and some treats. When Subaru offers nothing but silence, Isaac's composure starts to fracture. Trembling with a mounting fury, he demands to know if the kid has lost his mind by defying his direct orders. In reality, Subaru is completely broke anyway, without a single credit to his name. Isaac doesn't care, snarling at him to sit back down and stay put. The hero has no desire to waste his energy on petty vengeance for the body's previous owner. He just wants to leave peacefully. The blonde guy suddenly seizes the protagonist's arm. As Isaac sneers about the price of disrespect, Subaru warns him to let go if he values his life. The bully's eyes burn with pure loathing. He spits at Subaru, telling him to stop acting like he's something special. Subaru tells himself to stay calm, knowing it's unwise to start a brawl in such a public space. Out of nowhere, the blonde guy erupts into a fit of maniacal laughter. He mocks the protagonist, asking if he's shaking because he finally realizes how pathetic he is. He scoffs that the boy likely just stumbled through the tutorial by sheer dumb luck. Leaning in, he whispers a chilling warning. At any moment he chooses, he can make the boy vanish off the face of the earth. Then he turns on his heel and strolls away, telling his buddy to stay out of trouble. The word friend coming from Isaac's mouth makes Subaru's skin crawl. Meanwhile, the public explains that there are two distinct paths for players to ascend in power. The first is the standard route, conquering the tower's formal trials. This yields steady rewards and levels. It costs credits to progress, but it's safe. You only lose money, not your life. The second route is the wild hunt, slaying monsters in lawless zones or hidden dungeons. This path offers a much more explosive growth rate than the trials. However, this is raw reality. If your heart stops in there, you're dead forever. Currently, Subaru is treading through the Oros dungeon, a notoriously lethal hunting ground for players of his rank. But he believes that high-stakes risks are the only way to avoid a crawl-pace progression. Greater danger always translates to more legendary spoils. Checking his device, Subaru takes another look at the trending headlines. A player named Narigami Subaru has 80,000 live viewers watching him breeze through the 4th floor. The chat notes it's his 8th run, but seeing a stranger parade around with his exact name and donning his signature mask leaves Subaru feeling deeply offended. Suddenly, a notification pops up. Someone has donated 20,000 credits, and the boy gives a quick shout-out. It turns out, viewers can issue paid bounties and missions directly to streamers. 3 more fans pile on with challenges like show us you're the real deal, unlike that fraud on the other channel. The hero's hands tighten with envy. While he's bleeding for every inch here, that imposter is printing money. Genuinely irritated, Subaru stares at the stream for a few more seconds. But he quickly regains his focus, standing up to finish the task at hand. He unsheathes his blade, which was hidden inside the carcass of a fallen Oros. He drops into a combat stance as a swarm of monsters closes in, led by the massive Oros general. Even though he lacks the venomous arsenal he once possessed, Subaru smiles, knowing his current edge is sharper. The demon blade drinks his blood, supercharging his physical limits. He vaults over the lesser minions, declaring that he doesn't have a second to waste on trash. In a flash of motion, he strikes toward the boss like a bolt of lightning. The protagonist appears above the beast's head, and in the blink of an eye, he cleaves through the monster with surgical precision. He clears the dungeon, proving he's no amateur. Afterward, as he retrieves a dusty, ancient mask, a thought strikes him. Following the trend might actually be the fastest way to fix his bank account. He slides the mask on, realizing he just needs to play the part he invented. After all, in a sea of streamers pretending to be the legend, he is the genuine article. Over at the talent agency, the new Narikami stream is just beginning. A young woman watches the screen with intense focus. Suddenly, without warning, she lets out a scream of pure frustration, nearly knocking her co-worker out of his seat. She's fuming because a full 5-man squad failed to clear even a basic dungeon. Her friend asks why she's so worked up, since the early clear bonus was only 1,000 credits. She explains that some guy named Subikichi is making a mockery of everything. He's likely just another fanboy taking advantage of the fact that the real Subaru is gone. To her, the streaming world is stagnant because everyone is a cheap imitation. It's an insult to see amateurs playing with their lives without mastering the basics. The colleague asks why she traded the thrill of the tower for a desk job here. She pauses, then mutters that the climb simply lost its charm. In truth, her friend shouldn't judge, considering he's also a retired climber. He knows she only started the climb to meet the legendary Narikami, and her fire died when he vanished. Suddenly, the girl gasps, pointing out a new, exceptionally skilled rookie on the screen. However, as soon as they see he's wearing the mask, they both nearly hit the floor in disbelief. The guy groans, wondering why she's wasting time on a low-level second-floor broadcast. But she admits that she can't help but watch anyone in that mask, then reminds him he owes her 1,000 credits for a lost bet. Arriving at the gates of the second floor, the protagonist finds the scenery rather mundane. Still, knowing thousands of eyes are now tracking his every move adds a new layer of tension. A viewer named Lover Money asks if this is his rookie run. Subaru briefly confirms that he's a newcomer to this level. Lover Money advises him to kill the camera and focus on staying alive instead. Just then, a predatory bat monster screeches and dives from the shadows. Even as it attacks with terrifying momentum, Subaru catches it by the skull midair and slams it into the pavement like a heavy bag of grain. The protagonist turns back to the camera, asking if Lover is still feeling nervous. The objective of this floor is simple: survive the dungeon and find the exit. The viewer count climbs, but the girl continues to warn him against being overconfident. He thanks her for the concern, but assures her that he has everything under control. He prefers the solitary path to power, trusting no one's strength but his own. The audience thinks he's suicidal, but his famous name is already pulling in a massive crowd for his first fight. A swamp beast lunges low, aiming to shatter the hero's legs. With a fluid draw of his steel, he silences the creature instantly. He announces that it's time to pick up the pace. He clears a mud merman, bagging 2 achievement points. A swarm of giant bats descends, but the protagonist cuts through them like paper. His blade moves in a blur of perfection. The viewers can't even process the speed. The bats net him 2 points while merman adds 4. The hero explains to his audience that if you listen to the frequency of the wings, you can predict their exact coordinates. While the chat is losing their minds in awe, Subaru offers to go even deeper into his tactics. But it's still not enough for his goals. He is determined to farm every single achievement point available on this floor. The comments are divided. Some think his silence is cool, others think he's walking into a trap. The latter seems more likely as the protagonist stumbles upon a massive, teeming bat colony. Seeing Subaru walk into the nest, the chat erupts in a panic. Suddenly, a high roller sets a quest, 100 points for a total wipeout. Everyone thinks it's an impossible joke. But Subaru simply thanks him for the 100 credit tip and draws his sword. Back at the agency, the male employee shouts in surprise, demanding to know what could possibly have his colleague so captivated. He tries to apologize for the noise, but she's already completely entranced by the screen. She was absolutely mesmerized, her eyes glued to the hero's broadcast. The man inquired what could possibly be so captivating about it. She then cautioned that this was no ordinary player. He began muttering about settling his debt. But the girl cut him off, insisting that money wasn't the point. The truth was, she hadn't been able to look away from the protagonist for a single second. Though the man was baffled at first, it soon started to make perfect sense. Watching him tear through the monster hordes with such solitary precision was a spectacle. Her intuition for tracking these masked figures had finally hit the jackpot. In his past, Subaru was legendary because even under heavy fire, his composure never wavered. To those watching, his movements were so fluid it seemed as if he were reading the future. The protagonist paused for a brief moment of reflection. He then admitted he was just acting on instinct, explaining that his style was impossible for others to copy. Sig found the explanation bizarre, but Subaru realized the secret lay in reading the enemy's gaze. The one-eyed bats consistently lead their charge with a headlong lunge. Ironically, the larger the swarm, the more vulnerable they become, and Subaru exploited that flaw. He used their momentum against them, cleaving through the entire group in one go. For the audience, his tactical breakdown sounded as simple as explaining how to breathe. Finally, lover money nudged him to claim his hard-earned credits, but he struggled with the interface. He fiddled with his player kit in awkward silence for a long stretch of time, before finally confessing he had no clue how to actually withdraw the funds. The viewers were stunned by such a rookie mistake, but Lover stepped in to guide him. Wasting no more time, the hero set his sights on the next objective. Meanwhile, at Salton Corp, the girl let out a piercing shriek of pure excitement. She claimed the situation was dire, yet her radiant expression suggested she was loving every second. When her colleague groaned, she challenged him, asking if he'd ever witnessed such raw talent. He argued that the second floor was relatively basic, but she snapped back, saying he was downplaying a miracle. She became so obsessed that she began to believe their meeting was written in the stars. She even correctly speculated that this boy was the legendary Narukami Subaru reborn, just like a plot from a manhwa. Whenever Subaru's name came up, she would spiral into a state of total fangirl mania. Her friend Sargon had to intervene before she could dash off to hunt the protagonist down. That was exactly her plan, but Sargon looked at the situation through the cold lens of a businessman. He warned that pitching this to the management without hard data would get them fired. The two bickered back and forth, but Lover eventually settled down to keep watching the live feed. At last, the protagonist reached the most pivotal chamber in the entire dungeon, the final threshold standing between him and total completion. As he approached the massive gates, they groaned and swung open by their own power, revealing a slumbering beast, the warrior Wolf Greg, the ultimate guardian of this level. The mission wasn't to slay him, but to win the beast's respect through a trial of spirit. The system explicitly defined this encounter as a non-hostile test of worth. Yet, a lucrative bounty of 3,000 credits was posted for anyone who could actually defeat the wolf. In the hero's current financial state, that sum was a fortune, making his pulse quicken with nerves. Slowly, the massive creature began to stir, muscle by muscle, until it stood tall, towering over the young warrior. And much to the hero's surprise, the beast began to speak. The wolf first questioned if the boy was truly foolish enough to face him alone. The hero told him to see for himself. Red confessed that the boy's scent was intriguing. He smelled of a battle-hardened veteran. The warrior wolves possessed the gift of scent reading, allowing them to see a soul's true nature. In a heartbeat, the judgment was made. The wolf stepped aside, granting Subaru permission to pass through freely. But the hero offered a polite apology and announced that Greg was his target. The wolf was stunned. Subaru clarified that his goal was to slay him, and through his keen senses, Greg realized the boy was serious. Back at Saturn, the two scouts finally worked up the nerve to face their superior. A man named John sat at his workstation, fingers flying across the keys. He demanded to know the size of the rookie's following. Sargon sheepishly admitted it was only 20 people. But Lover chimed in with a proud grin, correcting him that they had already cleared 30. The boss stopped typing, asking if they were trying to pull a prank on him. The girl, whose real name is Hasuka, was reprimanded for failing to scout any genuine talent. The boss suggested she'd be more useful as a streamer herself, given her expertise. Ignoring the insult, she triumphantly pointed out that Subaru now had 40 active viewers. Inside the dungeon, the wolf hunkered down into a deadly defensive posture. The protagonist cleared his mind, silencing his inner doubts. Focusing only on the flow of battle, he drew the demon blade and steadied his breathing. Despite the immense pressure of his first real clash in this new body, the beast lunged with a speed that blurred the very air, and he managed to parry the strike at the absolute last microsecond. Rex extended his razor-sharp talons, trying to shred the boy's defenses. Subaru felt himself being driven back. Acknowledging the monster's overwhelming raw power, he realized that trying to outmuscle the wolf was a one-way ticket to the grave. Switching tactics, he began to focus entirely on evading Red's relentless assaults. The wolf praised his agility, but claimed victory was impossible, right as the hero struck the beast's claws. The strike was timed perfectly, creating a flawless window for a counter-defense. When he was finally cornered against the stone wall, the monster chuckled. It admitted the skirmish was entertaining and invited the boy to utter his final farewells. As Greg pounced, Subaru summoned every ounce of speed to slide beneath the wolf's torso. He had decoded the pattern. He baited the beast in his slamming into the masonry, trapping its limbs just long enough to strike. Subaru seized the opening, raining a flurry of precise slashes upon the wolf, before unleashing a devastating final strike to clinch the victory. In his final moments, Red showed no malice, only admiration for Subaru's incredible potential. He gave a final nod of respect before his massive form went limp on the floor. The hero's skills surged in level, and he was awarded a massive 500 achievement points. The stream's chat went wild, and the 3,000 credit bounty was immediately deposited into his account. Armed with 3,150 credits and 618 achievement points, the path to the next floor was clear. As he stepped through the threshold, he was greeted by a shimmering array of prompts. A selection of 16 different elemental paths appeared, a number dictated by his innate potential. This variety was a direct reflection of a player's hidden ceiling. Subaru knew that if he didn't claim the lightning element here, he'd never be his true self again. To keep his legacy alive, he made his choice without a moment's doubt. And in a flash of brilliant light, he was whisked away to the next stage. Back at Saturn headquarters, the atmosphere had completely shifted. The entire office was now vibrating with the same electric energy as the girl. Asuka announced that the viewership had hit 60, a feat that was unheard of for a second-floor rookie. The boss conceded that the boy was impressive for taking down the warrior wolf. Nevertheless, he argued that Subaru was still an improving gamble and a risky investment. In a bold move, Hasuka challenged John to a high-stakes wager. She vowed that if Subaru failed to master the lightning, she and her partner would work for free for 5 years. Sargon's eyes nearly popped out of his head as he screamed in protest. But John saw a win-win scenario. Mastering lightning was nearly impossible, yet Hasuka's conviction was absolute. John agreed to hire the rookie if he succeeded, while the girl physically silenced her panicked friend. Having chosen his path, the protagonist stood at the entrance to the lightning trail, but the moment he arrived, a stranger shoved him out of the way, yelling a desperate warning to stay back. That stranger lunged just in time to pull the boy to safety. A monstrous titan, wielding a massive club, was looming right over them. The young man shouted in a panic, asking what on earth the hero was thinking and if he had a death wish. Suddenly, a system alert flashed, issuing a quest to slay the giant fragment. Confusion surged through the ranks. No one could fathom why such a beast was here. This specific breed of colossus was only supposed to emerge in the final stages of the trial. The hero realized that Jack Rock's previous actions must have triggered a ripple effect in the world. The behemoth brought its weapon crashing down with bone-shattering force. But the protagonist pivoted, narrowly escaping the impact. The boy from before wouldn't stop shouting about how they had just stared death in the face. Ignoring the noise, the hero focused entirely on ending the threat before anyone could get in his way. As the giant hoisted its club for another swing, it left its defenses wide open. The hero slipped past the strike. In a moment, the monster's weapon hit the dirt. He used the beast's own massive arm as a springboard to launch himself upward. He soared toward its head, locking his sights on the vulnerable gap at its neck. With a singular motion, he buried his steel deep into the creature's throat. He finished the execution without even breaking a sweat. He coldly told the falling titan to hold its tongue. It was a redundant command, as the dead are famously silent for eternity. With the titan's fall, the system chimed to announce the successful completion of the fourth stage. Subaru felt his level and attribute surge, and he claimed a rare trophy, the giant heart. The boy who had tried to save him stood there gaping, mirrored by the stunned silence of the stream's viewers. Witnessing that raw display of power, the young man's tone shifted to one of profound respect as he asked for Subaru's name. He simply replied that he was the specialist sent to wipe the giants off the map. A short while later, back within the city walls, the protagonist took a breather. He checked the buzz on the Player Kid forums to see what the community was saying. The chat was desperate for a glimpse of his new loot, sensing it was a legendary find. Satisfying his own curiosity as well, he told his audience they would unbox the treasure together. He manifested the giant heart from his inventory, a rare ring that significantly boosts health and regeneration. He also equipped the Thunder Motion Armor set, which crackled with the raw essence of lightning. A fan named Love Neru dropped a 5,000 credit donation to see the lightning power in action. He expressed his gratitude as a wave of credits flooded in, fueling his drive to dominate the next challenge. Seeing the overwhelming support, Subaru began to suspect that his previous life must have been truly legendary. Unexpectedly, a sharp knock echoed against his chamber door. The boy he saved walked in, accompanied by a golden-haired knight in shimmering plate. He apologized for the intrusion and introduced the commander of the night village, Sir Pelly. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, they dove into the grim details of the giant incursions. The knight explained that both the military and the peasantry were on high alert around the clock. He apologized for his subordinates' earlier rudeness, explaining the high tensions, and thanked Subaru for protecting the people. The hero shrugged it off, stating he simply fulfilled his duty. Alice is the pride of the village, a champion who never flinches in the face of the giant hordes. Shifting gears, the knight revealed they had tracked down the giant's patriarch and intended to launch a suicide mission to kill him. Both men bowed low before the protagonist, pleading for his strength to preserve their home. The live chat was filled with pleas for Pelly's safety, but Subaru remembered a grim detail from the original lore. In the scripted timeline of the next stage, this noble knight was destined to die. Regardless, he motioned for the man to stand tall. He gave his word, promising to provide all the support he could muster. The knight's face lit up with gratitude, and the fifth stage officially commenced as evening fell. A battalion of warriors marched alongside the protagonist toward the patriarch's lair. He took a quick glance at his player kit. The comments were moving too fast to read, and his viewership was hitting record highs. Suddenly, the knight signaled the group to halt as they came upon a gruesome sight. The mangled corpse of a giant lay ahead, but it was the very patriarch they were hunting. Pelly volunteered to scout ahead to draw any potential fire, while the hero maintained the rearguard. However, the protagonist grabbed his shoulder to stop him. Before he could make a fatal mistake, the earth beneath them began to convulse violently. The shockwaves were so intense that the soldiers struggled to stay on their feet. The hero's voice turned grim as he warned that the true nightmare had just woken up. As a massive shadow turned its gaze toward the group, a legion of giants clawed their way out of the soil and began a relentless pursuit. It defied logic. An entire hidden army had been waiting right under their feet. Pelly stared at the overwhelming numbers, feeling the cold sting of hopelessness. The nightmare intensified as warriors were snatched up and devoured by the grotesque predators. The remaining men watched in horror, knowing they were the next items on the menu. The giants advanced with twisted, hungry smiles. Pelly roared for a full retreat, ordering his men back toward the base of the mountain. In the chaos, some knights were paralyzed by terror, while others fought to keep their formation. One soldier completely lost his grip on reality. After watching his comrades be torn apart in seconds, Pelly bellowed that retreat was a direct order and they must run for their lives. He urged them to think of their families back home, knowing a wipeout here meant the end of the village. Ultimately, only Peli and Falcon stood their ground to hold the line. But the protagonist remained at their side, his feet planted firmly in the blood-soaked earth. The blonde knight screamed at him to flee and lead the survivors to safety. But the protagonist countered, telling the knight he had it backwards. He demanded to know why the knight was still lingering and made his point clear. He couldn't unleash his full, destructive potential while he still had to worry about protecting the man. Peli refused to leave an ally to die alone, but the protagonist's gaze was unshakable. Reluctantly, the blonde knight retreated to gather reinforcements and secure the village. Indebted to the hero once more, he prayed that Subaru would make it out alive. The giants turned as one, focusing their predatory hunger on the solitary warrior. He didn't wait for them to close in. He took the initiative and sprinted forward. He roared a challenge, declaring himself their sole opponent. In a blur of steel, he hamstrung the lead giant with a lightning-fast strike. He immediately whirled around to cleave through another beast that tried to flank him. The monster's attention shifted entirely to Subaru, because in the blink of an eye, two of their kin had already been neutralized. Even if this was just a trial, the hero refused to let a single one of these things pass him. While the slaughter unfolded, the blonde knight ran with everything he had. Yet with every step, the guilt of leaving a comrade behind ate at his soul. The protagonist wasn't just fighting, he was dominating the battlefield. Lore stated Peli should have died here, but Subaru knew he had successfully rewritten that fate. Thus, he continued his dance of death amidst the giants, dispatching two more behemoths with a single, elegant sweep of his blade. His sword became a whirlwind that never stopped moving. He sent another foe spiraling into the air as the demon blade grew drunk on their essence. Subaru felt the first signs of fatigue, so he carved a path through the horde to find the true leader. Leaping across the piles of giant corpses, he used their bodies as stepping stones to reach his goal. Using the lesser beasts as springboards, he leaped onto yet another foe. He refused to break his momentum. Subaru danced across the battlefield, vaulting from one giant's crown to the next. His high-tier gear worked overtime to replenish his dwindling stamina. He was desperate to locate the commander, and by some stroke of luck, he caught sight of the Titan amidst the absolute carnage. The leader mirrored his intent, looking eager to crush the life out of the protagonist. Subaru felt the walls closing in. If he didn't end this engagement immediately, he'd be a dead man. As the behemoth wound up for a strike, Subaru bet everything on one final gambit. Subaru triggered the thunder motion ability of his armor with a sharp snap of his fingers. The resulting electrical surge sent waves of agony through the giants. However, it was the deafening sonic boom that truly shattered their composure. The massive creatures began to thrash around in a blind, violent frenzy. Even the boss found himself paralyzed by the sensory overload. The protagonist vaulted high over the commander's reaching arms. Seizing the window, he buried his blade deep into the soft tissue of the giant's neck. The execution was so rapid the beast couldn't even raise a hand in defense. It toppled backward like a felled tree, as the system blared Subaru's total victory. His attributes spiked across the board, and the live chat exploded in worship. In any other story, the hero would have posed for the camera. But the climate was turning hostile, and extreme greed had hit its limit for recovery. Even with the floor cleared, the remnants wouldn't vanish until the timer expired. It was a grueling reality that pushed him to the edge of collapse. Yet, because he had conquered the fifth stage, the heavens split open and a pillar of abyssal black lightning struck Subaru. Meanwhile, far from the chaos, deep within a secluded forest cabin, Rena sat intently watching the player kid feed. Seeger approached and asked what she was so focused on. She claimed she was simply taking in the fresh air. Seeger sighed, suggesting she should cherish these quiet moments, because their time in this world was rapidly running out. When Rena tried to speak earnestly, her friend simply brushed her off. Driven by curiosity, the girl leaned in to see what had her companion so enthralled. Rena revealed she was following the rise of a player named Narukami Subaru. But the moment Seeger hinted he might be their old captain, Rena's temper flared. She snapped that he was just a flashy second-floor streamer looking for attention. She reminded her friend of their harsh reality. If their true Subaru were still among the living, a snake like Kazuki would have been dealt with long ago. Rena knew their leader was gone and pleaded for a friend to move on. But Seeger wasn't convinced. Rena shouted, asking how long she expected a ghost to stay hidden. But Seeger just countered with a heavy question. Were they really just going to sit on the sidelines for the rest of their lives? Rena insisted she was only watching the stream to kill a bit of boredom. But her words died in her throat when she looked back at the screen. Seeger followed her gaze, her face twisting into the same expression of pure shock. During the trial, the protagonist had unleashed the lightning element upon the horde, coating his demon blade in a sheath of crackling high-voltage energy. With his power amplified, he didn't just parry the giants. He obliterated every single beast that dared to step within his range. When the dust finally settled, Subaru realized he didn't have the strength to even stand. He had emerged victorious over the monsters, but he had paid a steep price for pushing his new vessel past its breaking point. Fortunately for the exhausted boy, he wasn't as alone as he thought. Peli had actually returned with the cavalry, and seeing the hero slumped in the dirt, he rushed forward to provide much-needed support. Subaru couldn't even manage a single word of thanks. His vision blurred, and he slipped into a deep, heavy unconsciousness. Over at the agency, the room turned icy when the broadcast signal cut out. Segan and John scrambled for ways to soothe the panicked girl. She looked as if she were on the verge of tears, but the reality was different. Her face was actually burning with a deep, frantic blush of embarrassment. She had sent a personal note to the hero and was terrified he'd view it as a cold business deal. Segan dryly reminded her that, legally speaking, it was exactly a business contact. Hasuka yelled that she was a fan first and a manager second, making her feelings perfectly valid. Quickly changing the subject, she mentioned she'd already flagged him to the director. The unique lightning mastery that once belonged only to the legend now lived within this rookie. John was forced to agree that the boy was undeniably a rising star worth watching. Suddenly, Segan shouted that the hero had opened the email, sending Hasuka into a near faint. But unfortunately for the love-struck manager, he only gave it a cursory glance, causing her excitement to vanish in an instant. That same day, a top-tier analyst who critiques player combat prepared for his next show. Hawkeye had built a massive empire on his expert breakdowns and survival strategies. He meticulously studied the combat footage of high-ranking players, reviewing everyone from the rookie Amon to the powerhouse Kazuki. He planned to tear apart the techniques of the current elite 1x1. Hawkeye admitted that the original Subaru was the gold standard of combat AI, then pivoted the day's stream to the new kid on the block. Hawkeye scanned the trending live topics for inspiration, and found himself completely captivated by the protagonist's recent dungeon clear. Even a pro like him was shaken by how flawlessly the kid controlled his surging power. Hawkeye explained that the hero was manipulating the flow of battle, channeling every ounce of force through his blade without a single wasted movement. The streamer found no flaws to exploit and realized the general public was missing the brilliance of it. He predicted the boy would become a titan of the industry and urged his fans to stay tuned. In the middle of his hype, Hawkeye almost forgot to use his signature analytical skill. With his enhanced vision, he declared the boy's precision might actually exceed Subaru's at his very zenith. The following morning, the protagonist woke up with a start. A system prompt notified him that the sixth floor was on standby and offered a chance to withdraw. Though his health was stable, he felt a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, opening his kit. Subaru saw his follower count had swelled while he was out, so he apologized to the chat and announced a short hiatus. The protagonist warped back to the neutral challenge lounge, staring at the massive gate that led to the next world. Another message from Hasuka popped up, begging him to reconsider their partnership. Subaru's first instinct was to delete what he assumed was relentless spam, but his eyes widened when he saw the official Saturn Entertainment seal. Later, back in the city hub, Subaru pulled up his digital interface. He researched the massive corporation willing to back him. They were a true titan in the entertainment sector. The fact that Hawkeye, a Saturn-backed pro, had been singing his praises was fueling a wildfire of fame. Subaru saw the comment sections had turned into a literal war zone of fans and skeptics. He felt a quiet sense of satisfaction and sent a silent thank to Hawkeye for having such sharp eyes. Just outside the area where the protagonist was standing, Isaac was lurking, closing the distance between them. Having heard Hawkeye's rave reviews about the hero's god-tier potential, he was boiling with rage that a second-floor loser was stealing his spotlight. Would you like me to continue editing the next set of lines for the SRT document? Isaac had to exert massive self-control to stay composed, but his mood shifted as he walked into a tavern. He suddenly grew much more spirited, because he had just spotted the protagonist sitting inside. Isaac attempted to strike up a conversation, but Subaru completely blanked him. Incensed, he marched to the table and doused the hero in his own scalding coffee. Once he had everyone's attention, he offered a mock apology, acting as if the encounter were a total accident. Isaac joked that the second floor was a tiny world, but the hero still refused to acknowledge his existence. Losing patience, the blonde bully demanded the coffee and snacks he had ordered during their first meeting. He exploded in a fury when Subaru simply stood up to depart. He roared that he had already warned him about the consequences of such blatant defiance. He lunged forward, grabbing the protagonist and snarling into his face. He commanded him to beg for forgiveness if he valued his life. But the hero effortlessly swatted Isaac's hand away, stating he was officially done with his pathetic drama. He applied such pressure that the blonde guy's wrist nearly snapped under his grip. Subaru walked out, coolly noting that they were now even for the spilled coffee. Isaac scrambled to block his path, but Subaru didn't even cast a glance back, slamming the door firmly shut, leaving an icy silence in his wake. The blonde guy muttered that he had intended to climb the tower without causing a scene. But after being humiliated and treated like common filth, he decided he had been far too lenient with the failure. Outside the tavern, the protagonist checked his device and sent a ping to a contact at the Forest Lodge. He had scheduled a high-stakes meeting with Rena deep in the woods. Inside a gloomy cavern on the second floor, the protagonist cut through waves of monsters as he neared the Lizard King's lair. With his extreme greed skill now at level 3, he was mastery personified. Suddenly, a spark ignited into a titanic lizard. The salamander, the dungeon's final boss, emerged from the heat. He charged in instantly, determined to prevent any slip-ups this time around. Subaru was eager to push his lightning affinity to its absolute breaking point. First, he surged the electric current directly into his lower body, launching himself into the air to bring a crushing blow down upon the salamander. He moved with the same lethal grace he possessed in his former life. The beast countered by breathing a torrent of flame to incinerate the boy mid-flight. Subaru funneled the lightning through his demon blade and sliced, carving right through the firestorm, though the physical strain was immense. Finally, perched atop the beast, he used every ounce of his resolve to cleave it in two. He finished the raid with his boot firmly planted on the monster's spine. At the exit, the hero noted that his exhaustion was lingering longer than usual. He still had a mountain of points, but the cost of growth was steep. Evolving extreme greed further would now require a staggering 40,000 credits. Subaru wished for a lucrative opportunity to present itself. Right on cue, a shadow stepped out from the tree lane, calling out his name with a sneer. The intruder mocked his desperate attempts to grind for levels in the mud, remarking that despite their shared history since childhood, he was still shocked by how far the loser had crawled. Subaru noted that the guy certainly didn't know when to quit. Isaac snapped back, declaring that his mercy had officially run dry. Closing the distance, he whispered that it would be in everyone's best interest if this was their final goodbye. This threat only piqued Subaru's curiosity. Meanwhile, in the bustling heart of the starting city, the man known as Hawkeye entered an unassuming, high-end cellar. There, the CEO of Saturn Entertainment, John, beckoned him over to join his table. They exchanged pleasantries, discussing the steady growth of the business. Hawkeye admitted things were going reasonably well. John shrugged, noting that a loyal audience doesn't jump ship without a major disaster. They quickly pivoted to the real reason for their meeting over tea. The president was eager for Hawkeye's professional breakdown of the new protagonist. He stood by his initial claim. The boy's potential eclipsed even the legendary Subaru. Trusting his friend's sharp instincts, John revealed his plan to sign the boy. Hawkeye smiled, praising the president's keen nose for a profitable venture. With his analyst seal of approval, John was ready to make Subaru an offer. He then proposed a collaboration to boost the boy's views. Back at the forest confrontation, the tension reached a boiling point. The hero faced his stalker without a hint of trepidation. Isaac began a dark lecture on the dangers of wandering solo through dungeons. He scoffed that the kid had only survived on luck, mocking his attempt to mimic the great Subaru. In truth, the blonde bully wanted to erase the memory of the Blue Eyes leader forever. The mere mention of that legend made his blood boil with resentment. Subaru sighed, exhausted by the world's obsession with his past self, and asked why the villain was so fixated on making his life a living hell. Isaac blamed the name itself, though Subaru pointed out that most people actually admired it. To clarify his grudge, the blonde guy asked if he knew the identity of his father, but the hero looked blank. Isaac roared that he was the son and heir of the great Reinhardt. Subaru suddenly remembered the man known as the One-Strike Sword Saint. Years ago, the protagonist had sought him out, causing a massive stir in the martial world. Subaru, leading the Blue Eyes guild back then, had appeared and humiliated Ranker Reinhardt with a single, sub-second strike. Despite the defeat, Reinhardt tried to rally. But as he struggled to regain his footing, he collapsed face-first in the dirt, back in the present. Isaac screamed at him never to utter his father's name with that mouth. Subaru pondered if the hate was for him or the shadow of his father, attempting to explain that the original Hasoi Subaru had already paid a heavy price for that legacy. The blonde villain grew tired of the philosophical chatter. He conjured a swirling vortex of flames to trap them both. Raising his hands, glowing with magical heat, he prepared to finish the job. He told Subaru to shut his mouth and accept his impending death. Isaac vented his hatred for Subaru and the divine status the world had granted him. He argued that it was the leader's own arrogance that buried the guild on the 8th floor. He called it just punishment and hoped the team was rotting in hell. He then hurled a massive fireball. Claiming the hero's luck had finally run out the moment he claimed that name. The projectile detonated directly against Subaru. Isaac slumped, panting from the effort, cursing his lack of control over his own overwhelming power. But he smirked, already imagining how he would dominate the masked streamer in their next encounter. The moment the word mask left his lips, the protagonist walked out from the smoking wreckage, mask perfectly in place, and asked if they were discussing him. Isaac's jaw dropped as he roared that it was impossible to be unscathed. After taking a direct, magical blast to the face. Would you like me to continue with the next section of the SRT document? As our hero puts it, he has zero tolerance for people barking orders at him, and even less for enduring the incoherent drivel of a blonde moron. Droning on endlessly, he delivers a punishing blow directly to the guy's gut, sending him collapsing to his knees as he crumples into the dirt. Breathless and broken, Isaac can't even manage a whimper, leaving the hero to mock his pathetic expression. Isaac's mind reels, unable to process the sheer speed of his downfall. Subaru then offers him a chilling little game. He challenges his rival to guess his true identity. Is he just Hasoi Subaru, or the viral sensation Narukami Subaru? Or perhaps, the original Narukami Subaru of the legendary Blue Eyes Guild? Isaac's face pales as he realizes this loser is the star of the streams. Yet he still can't accept that a nobody could truly master the lightning element. He tries to convince himself it's just a fluke. He sneers that a lowlife like the hero shouldn't be able to survive at this difficulty level. In a desperate bid for dominance, he claims he surpassed even the prime Subaru of Blue Eyes. Isaac charges the protagonist in a blind, white-hot fury, but Subaru's counter is swift and devastating, cleaving his arm clean off in a single blur of steel, while the blonde man stares in horror at his stump, trying to comprehend the reality of the wound. The protagonist asks him, with cold indifference, where all that misplaced confidence went. Dazed and bleeding out, Isaac flashes back to the moment. Subaru mentioned Hasoi's agonizing struggle, speaking of the trauma, as if he were an outsider looking in. The realization finally hits him like a tidal wave. This really is the legendary Subaru. But unmasking the truth seconds before his end changes nothing, with 2 effortless strikes. The fight is settled, and the blonde bully slips into unconsciousness. Looking down, the hero remarks that this victory is his small token of gratitude for inheriting Hasoi's vessel. Over at a local diner, patrons are whispering about a Subaru wannabe in their midst. They cringe at his behavior, mocking the fact that he's currently broadcasting live. Reflecting on his strategy, the hero knows the mask is essential for keeping his enemies in the dark about his rebirth. Finally, the person he's been expecting walks through the door. Hasuka greets him warmly, confirming she was the one behind the mysterious invitation. She attempts a formal introduction, but is clearly fighting a wave of social anxiety. They share a professional handshake. The girl is struck by how closely the boy mirrors the aura of the original Subaru. It feels as if the legend has cheated death and is simply hiding behind a piece of plastic. When Subaru asks if she's all right, she nearly melts from the pressure, terrified of failing the boss's order to be charming. She feels like she's fumbling the most important meeting of her life. She starts nervously scratching her head, her stress levels peaking. The protagonist breaks the ice by asking if she's a fan of the great Subaru. She confirms she is, but before he can act humble, she clarifies that she's specifically a fan of him. Hasuka beams as she reveals she's been following his channel since his very first empty broadcast. She admits she was terrified for him during his suicidal charge into the giant challenge. Moved by her sincerity, the protagonist offers a genuine word of thanks for her loyalty. Hasuka rambles about it being fate, which is why she used the official company credentials to hunt him down. Eventually, she composes herself, sliding into her professional role to break down the contract. She outlines a massive campaign, from high-end ads to global events, to build the hero's brand into a powerhouse. The catch? He just has to keep doing what he does best, streaming. Subaru asks if every creator gets this royal treatment. She explains he's a once-in-a-generation talent. He cuts her off, asking about her management style, and if all agents are as devoted as she is. She tries to justify her intensity, worried that her passion might be coming off as overbearing or unwanted. While she frets over her impression, Subaru is actually stunned by her incredibly high power level. He remains silent, realizing that if a mere talent manager is this formidable, he has a massive mountain to climb to reach the top. As Hasuka's mood dips, thinking she's failed, the protagonist speaks up. He tells her he's decided to place his trust in her. He reaches out and officially signs with Saturn Entertainment. The girl is overwhelmed. Tears of joy well up as she celebrates her biggest win. The next day, the protagonist kicks off his stream to a staggering 703 live viewers. He's stunned to see his audience count triple in a single night. Crediting Hasuka as marketing genius, he rallies the chat, promising them a show they'll never forget. The protagonist launches the sixth stage, the Legend of the Lightning Path. Sheltered from a downpour inside a makeshift hut, the Night Battalion is strategizing their next deep strike mission. Alice asks for an update on the protagonist, but Falcon reports he's still missing in action. A skeptic in the group questions his reliability, doubting a lone wanderer could have slain the giant patriarch. Others mock the idea, suggesting the blonde knight was fooled by a show-off. Pelly snaps at them to keep their ignorant comments to themselves. Just as the tension peaks, the masked boy steps into the light. Pelly rushes over to check for injuries, but the hero assures him he's untouched. To the rest of the soldiers, his mask makes him look like a total fraud. The hero can feel their blatant disbelief radiating through the room. Recalling Hasuka's training on muting his mic for the stream, he directs his sharpest words only to the NPCs, calling them out for their baseless arrogance. Before a fight breaks out, a weathered, veteran knight steps forward to thank him, introducing himself as the seasoned warrior Dale. Subaru returns the greeting, and the old man reveals a shocking truth. He was the one guarding the village during the initial assault. The hero immediately asks if there's a threat even greater than the patriarch. The veteran explains that the primordial giants who once challenged the gods are sealed away and lost to time. Those walking the earth today are merely watered-down shadows of that ancient power. However, Dale's voice trembles as he describes the titan that rose after the patriarch fell. A heavy, suffocating dread fills the shack, but the protagonist remains unbothered. He calculates that taking down such a foe will be a straightforward task. Dale, lacking the heart to even ask for more help, warns that his confidence only exists because he hasn't faced the true horror. Even Pelly loses his cool, shouting at Subaru about the weight of the local legends. He tells of a shard of pure lightning hidden atop the treacherous nature mountain. Ancient prophecy claims only the village's true savior can claim that shard. Fast forward a few days, a nearby settlement is being reduced to ash. The villagers are fleeing in terror as the giants tear through their homes. The giant leader sneers at his victims, looking at them with a twisted, paternal cruelty. He snatches a brave knight off the ground as if he were a toy. Holding the warrior in his massive palm, he casually crushes the life out of him, declaring to the heavens that he will drown the world in human blood to avenge his fallen kin. Subaru arrives at the edge of the carnage, descending the mountain to find the city in ruins. Even his composure slips. The giant looks like a total, bloodthirsty lunatic. Flashback. The blonde knight warned that the giants would arrive in 3 days, urging Subaru to flee if he failed to find a shard. But the hero had climbed Nature Mountain anyway, obsessed with claiming the lightning. He knew no fear. He was certain that no obstacle in this world could stop his ascent. The chat immediately catches the echo. It's the exact same catchphrase the original Subaru used to say. His hardcore fans start dropping high-stakes missions with massive credit rewards. Ignoring the notifications, the young man spurs his horse onward, until he reaches the exact coordinates the knight provided for the lightning fragment. The hero pulls his reins as a colossal stone wall rises up to block his path. Immediately, he began his reconnaissance. Pelly explained that the shard was the stuff of ancient folklore. Yet, even he lacked a clear description of what they were searching for. The blonde knight admitted his own inability to claim such power, but he was certain only a lightning wielder could crush the giants. Back in the mundane world, Hasuka shrieked with delight, informing her boss that the deal was signed. He let out a booming laugh, remarking that the girl had finally evolved into a true professional. Hasuka offered her thanks, though she playfully pouted, asking if she'd been a disappointment until now. Regardless, John mentioned his meeting with the master analyst Hawkeye and hung up, noting the young star would call soon. The moment her shift ended, the girl collapsed on her bed, eagerly pulling up the hero's broadcast, getting to witness his exploits on screen while managing his career behind the scenes. For her, it was an absolute fantasy come alive. She tuned in exactly as the protagonist uttered that iconic catchphrase. But rather than cheering, she froze in genuine astonishment. It was unsettling how effortlessly those legendary words rolled off his tongue. At the mountain's summit, the protagonist ignited his electrical aura. The audience grew restless, assuming the pressure was making him crack. Especially after the hero punched a massive crater into the solid stone face. He didn't relent. He drove his fists forward with escalating force, triggering a violent electrical detonation. A smirk crossed his face. He had finally located the hidden treasure. The chat erupted in confusion, wondering what the hero had discovered. Only he could perceive the primal lightning humming in sync with the current in his veins. This ancient energy was sealed behind the secret threshold he had just unearthed. As he stepped toward it, the viewers gossiped that he'd never get through without a key. Unfazed, he simply reached out toward the barrier. The moment his skin grazed the rock, arcs of high-voltage blue light surged forth. Then, centering himself once more, the protagonist funneled every spark into his arm, chambering a final, heavy strike. He had already deciphered the riddle of the entrance. Instead of hunting for a keyhole, he intended to shatter the locks with pure force. When his lightning collided with the door, the structure groaned and trembled as if alive. Like a magical mechanism, it swung wide to welcome our hero inside. He took a steadying breath and stepped into the darkness to face his ultimate trial. As he crossed the threshold, the heavy gates slammed shut, sealing him within. He was trapped until the mission was complete. Meanwhile, back at his old quarters, the soldiers were busy refining their defensive maneuvers. The veteran Dale asked if the blonde knight truly believed the boy could harness the storm. He answered with an instant, unwavering yes. Dale noted the captain's immense faith, but to Pelly, doubting the hero was simply out of the question. Suddenly, a frantic soldier burst in, wailing that they were all doomed regardless of Subaru's success. He collapsed, shivering, claiming the others couldn't fathom the terrifying scale of the giant they were about to face. Pelly stood over the trembling boy, asking if he was seriously suggesting they surrender. The blonde knight was desperate to believe in the protagonist, remembering how they'd been saved before. But the boy snapped back that it was easy to be brave when you hadn't looked that nightmare in the eye. In that instant, the entire cabin began to vibrate violently. Rations and gear slid off the tables, clattering onto the floor. A sentry charged through the door, screaming that the enemy had reached the perimeter. Panic surged through the room. No one expected the siege to begin so abruptly. Deep within the cavern he'd forced open, the protagonist pressed on, scanning the shadows for the trial's true objective. The chat was growing bored, complaining that the cave looked completely empty. A few clever viewers mentioned that real lightning is often too swift for the human eye to track. Subaru took the hint and began searching for the invisible. He shut his eyes, focusing on the trial's title, The Lightning Path. Sensing a massive surge of power vibrating beneath his boots, a plan took shape. He snatched a jagged stone from the path and hurled it into the void, putting his entire weight behind the throw. When high-frequency energy saturates the air, it remains hidden, but the further an object travels, the more lethal the discharge becomes. The rock was vaporized just a few paces from his hand. Even knowing this was a lethal gauntlet, he realized his only path forward was straight through the middle. The hero concluded this was a brutal test of grit. A single stumble meant an agonizing death. Viewers began setting up bounty missions, while others pleaded with him to turn back before he was fried. He offered a quick thanks to his fans and continued his march into the storm. At the woodland cottage, while the evening meal was simmering, Seeger was completely absorbed in the broadcast on her device. She was so engrossed that she nearly hit the ceiling when Rena suddenly appeared. Rena jumped in return. She suspiciously asked if her friend was watching something scandalous. Seeger tried to play it cool, claiming she was just feeling a bit sluggish. Rena teased her mercilessly, joking that perverts are always the first to grow shaggy hair. In truth, being forbidden from watching streams had made the girl incredibly restless. Rena's curiosity piqued as she tried to shove her way onto the sofa to see the screen. Feeling cornered, Seeger lost her temper and snapped at her friend. She told her to go find another place to lounge and to stop poking her nose into her business. While she hurriedly muted the audio, stung by the outburst, Rena stood up, the atmosphere in the room turning sour. Regretting her harsh tone, Seeger suggested she stay for dinner. But Rena just ignored her, slamming the door hard as she exited. Finally alone, Seeger could return to the live stream in peace. If Rena caught her watching this specific player, the fallout would be catastrophic. The girl whispered to herself that even if the world moved on, Subaru wouldn't forget his past. She couldn't ignore it. The protagonist's every move was a perfect mirror of the captain, aside from his bizarre, newfound obsession with hoarding credit points. Suddenly, she realized she had let her guard down. Rena's hand dropped onto her shoulder. She asked if Seeger really thought she wouldn't notice, her face twisted in a mask of cold fury. Deep inside the lightning path, The protagonist navigated the invisible minefield with extreme caution. But eventually, the first massive shocks began to tear through his body. The progress bar was mocking him, sitting at a measly 2.3. Subaru gritted his teeth, the pain sparking a haunting sense of déjà vu. He had danced with this kind of agony many times in a life long gone. Even as it ticked up to 3.2, the end was nowhere in sight. Yet he didn't waver, now that he understood the nature of the beast. He knew victory was simply a matter of outlasting the pain. The chat couldn't comprehend why he wouldn't just run, unable to feel the volts cooking his nerves. To him, reaching the finish line was the only thing that mattered. But if he could manage it, the hero wanted to uncover the deeper secrets hidden in this electrical tomb. For his private studio, Hawkeye watched every frame with professional intensity. He recalled John's directive to find a way to work with this rising legend. Such a bold move is out of character for the big boss. John noted that in the world of live streaming success, you can only influence half of the outcome. Hawkeye understood that a channel's prestige depends on its roster. Subaru's broadcast felt less like a veteran's lecture and more like an intimate, steady vlog. Since Narukami is still a rising rookie, Hawkeye only needs to apply his proven expertise. This is a rare chance to hitch a ride on a speeding comet and help him transform into the brightest star in the firmament. Rumor says Hawkeye stuck to analysis because he lacked the nerve to scale the tower. But the reality is that, just like the elite, he secretly yearns to touch the heavens himself. For a second, he fantasized about being in Subaru's shoes and lost his grip on the stream. Snapping out of it, he scrambled back to his desk, only to realize he'd missed something absolutely crucial. Returning to the hero's feed, the protagonist was still treading his grueling path. But as the finish line neared, his body became a map of severe trauma. Subaru didn't falter or let a single cry of agony escape. He simply pushed forward, absorbing every shock in haunting silence. Legends say the most potent lightning is the kind that sears the very soul. By now, the hero had traveled so far that currents were dancing through his heart and spirit veins. With the completion bar hitting 20, his internal circuits surged open, granting him a precious point of mana. These hidden meridians are the fundamental conduits of power. Just as veins carry lifeblood, opening these channels clears the debris from one's spiritual essence. In essence, the raw fury of the storm had now saturated the protagonist's entire being. Hasoi's original body had never been purified, so the hero was forced to improvise a solution. This process is usually done with internal mana, as using raw external energy is agonizingly suicidal. Despite the blood soaking his clothes, the protagonist kept limping toward his goal. Watching from her living room, Rena felt her heart shatter at the sight. She watched with bated breath. As a veteran player, she knew exactly what he was attempting. But the sheer recklessness of his method left her completely baffled. He was essentially letting a wild external force rewrite his DNA instead of using his own magic. The pain involved is legendary. Most warriors would have blacked out instantly. Even if death in this trial is a simulation, the physical agony is terrifyingly real. The girl fought back tears as she watched him suffer, desperate to understand what could possibly drive him to such extremes. At the 50 mark, the purification of his secondary meridians reached completion. It was then that the hero realized he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. The strain was so overwhelming he feared he would perish just as he had in his previous life. Subaru used to preach that no wall was too high to climb. That was a mantra he used to shield his teammates from despair, mainly because back then he was the undefeated champion. But now, the weight of those empty words filled him with bitter regret. The hero lamented his past arrogance and pride. Perhaps if he hadn't played the untouchable god, his friends wouldn't have shared his grave. Worse, the last memory he had of the blonde was a stinging rebuke of his ego. Haunted by his failures, he forced his broken body to keep moving into the lightning. But finally, his strength evaporated, and he collapsed face first into the dirt. His limbs were like lead, refusing to obey even his simplest commands. Drifting into a coma, he awoke in a lush green meadow in his original form, lost in the beauty. When he turned, he saw his old squad gathered for a peaceful picnic. The sight left him completely paralyzed with shock. Suhei, Sodake, Iori, Seeger, and Rina, they were all there, smiling and together. Believing it was a dream come true, he sprinted toward them, desperate for their touch. Subaru began to sob as the warmth of the scene felt impossibly tangible. He laughed through his tears, ready to tell them all about the horrific nightmare he'd just escaped. But their smiles curdled as they began to curse him for leading them to their slaughter. Subaru's heart plummeted into an abyss of despair. The girl who died by the blonde's blade demanded to know why his perfection hadn't saved them. After all his boasting about being the strongest, the peaceful campfire roared into a pillar of hellish red flame. Subaru tried to scream his defense, but his comrades withered into hideous, wailing spirits. The hero's cries became a hollow roar. He fell to his knees, begging them not to leave him in the dark, but a blinding blast tore the vision apart. Waking back in the cavern, Subaru realized he had just survived a mental breakdown. Progress was at 97. He was a mangled wreck, but the finish line was finally within reach. Despite the trauma of the vision, he was grateful for the reminder of why he survived and what Kazuki owed him. Meanwhile, in the village, the terrified inhabitants stood shoulder to shoulder with the knights, bracing for the impact. A colossus had already smashed through the outer perimeter. The knights scanned the chaos for the commander. Many grumbled that the hero had abandoned them, but Peli roared in his defense. They were quick to trust a stranger with their lives, and even quicker to turn on their leader. For that, the blonde knight asked if these cowards were even worthy of the armor they wore. Dale stepped forward, his voice a steady anchor for the wavering troops. He reminded them that survival comes before blame. Igniting his blade with a brilliant mana shroud, he declared, "That knights are the shield of the people, not a burden to be carried." With a battle cry, he charged into the fray. Dale and Peli threw themselves at the behemoths, prepared to go down in a blaze of glory. At that exact moment, the protagonist's progress bar ticked to 99. Before him hovered a pulsating sphere of pure, concentrated electrical energy. He knew instinctively that this was the heart of the storm he came to claim. His fatigue was at its absolute limit, but having crawled through hell to get here, surrender was no longer an option. Back in the village square, Dale moved like a blur, swinging his steel, to hamstrung the nearest giant with surgical precision. The beast howled in agony and swiped blindly at the old veteran, but missed entirely in that opening. The blonde knight lunged from the shadows, telling his mentor to leave the finishing blow to him. He scaled the giant's massive frame like an acrobat. Once he reached the base of its skull, he launched into the air, raining down a flurry of lethal slashes. The giant was dismantled in a heartbeat, crashing to the ground as a lifeless heap of flesh. Seeing the titan fall, a flicker of hope finally ignited in the knight's eyes. They swarmed the fallen monster, venting their collective terror on its remains. Peli sighed, believing they had finally slain the worst of them, but the relief was short-lived. Dale's eyes went wide as he warned that this was merely a foot soldier, not the true king. Before they could process the warning, the knights were stunned by how fragile their victory felt. One soldier let his guard down, thinking the worst had passed. But in an instant, he was flattened into the pavement. Peli and Dale could only stare as a massive, dark silhouette loomed in the distance. Would you like me to continue with the next part of this story? The blonde knight realized instantly that this titan operated on a terrifyingly superior scale. Meanwhile, back with the protagonist. At 99.99 completion, he finally clamped his hand around the core of electrical essence. Subaru roared that this victory would be the cornerstone of his absolute vengeance. A violent eruption of lightning tore through the air. The storm subsided as quickly as it had gathered, and when the dust settled, it appeared his grueling trial had finally reached its conclusion. However, the second he relaxed his combat stance, a brutal shock jolted through his nerves as his minor meridians finally finished their expansion. He was so physically fragile that a single stray breeze could have finished him off. Fortunately, luck was on his side. The protagonist only drifted into unconsciousness after successfully clearing the 6th stage. Watching from afar, John felt a knot of anxiety. The hero was perpetually dancing on the edge of destruction. He worried the boy didn't know how to pull back when the cameras were rolling. During a high-stakes call with Hawkeye, both confirmed they were glued to Subaru's stream, but Hawkeye exclaimed to the boss that this hero was destined for superstardom. He was a double threat, a god-tier player and a magnetic streamer, just like the original legend. Hawkeye argued that the hero's grit was exactly what the fans craved. It felt raw and authentic. After all, the former Sovereign of Blue Eyes was a warrior first, not a digital entertainer. They were witnessing the evolution of a new Subaru, forged in the fires of a live broadcast. Back to the hero's perspective. After being pinned to the dirt by exhaustion, he eventually forced himself to stand. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest from the overexertion. His fatigue meter sat at a dangerous 81, but his core attributes had spiked significantly. Clearing stage 6 had flooded his account with viewer tips. He now held 20,000 credits, exactly half of the fortune required to evolve his extreme greed. At last, he held the weapon to slay the giants. A legendary tier artifact known as the Spear of Lightning, a single-use mystery to everyone in the chat. It was a high-level treasure that typically shouldn't appear until the 8th floor. The protagonist carefully stowed the relic for the moment, noting that an item of such immense power could shift its properties based on the environment. He finally emerged from the depths of the cave, ready to conduct a total purge. Back at the besieged village, the knights faced a behemoth as tall as a skyscraper. This was the true monarch of the giants, the ultimate target of the quest. He loomed over the fortifications as King Graf let out a deafening, bone-chilling roar. A terrified knight broke rank to flee, and Peli barked at him to stand fast. The boy wailed in terror, sobbing that he had tried to warn them about the sheer magnitude of this nightmare. In a pathetic display, he threw himself at the monster's colossal feet, groveling and begging the Titan to spare his miserable life. But the boy's plea backfired. The giant was insulted that a mere insect presumed to negotiate. Dale lunged forward, trying to haul his comrade out of the death zone. He screamed for them both to retreat, but he hesitated a split second too long, as the blonde knight let out a desperate warning cry. A massive boulder pulverized them both, snuffing out their lives instantly. Peli's resolve shattered. He saw no path to victory and no room left to run. The survivors were cornered like panicked birds in a cage. Peli was initially paralyzed by pure dread, but that fear quickly curdled into a white-hot, desperate rage. He shrieked into the wind that he knew exactly who had murdered the giant's kin. This revelation caught the Titan's attention instantly, when the behemoth demanded the location of the executioner. The trembling blonde boy pointed his blade toward the distant peaks, claiming that was the direction Subaru had taken. He had hoped to lead the monster on a wild goose chase, but the beast was deceptively sharp. The giant realized the knight was stalling. He sneered, asking if the killer had fled or if Peli was just eager to die in his place. Suddenly, a violent bolt of lightning tore through the mountain sky. Both the Titan and the knight froze, their eyes drawn to the dazzling flash. The sheer scale of the discharge was so massive it commanded the attention of everyone on the battlefield. Peli knew instinctively it had to be the protagonist. From the mountain's crest, our hero initiated Stage 7, Thunder, the grand finale of the trial. He knew that if anything more powerful existed, the second floor wouldn't be able to contain it. Subaru stood tall, shedding all doubt, and deciding to stop overthinking the odds. He intended to bring the monster down with a single, absolute strike. Technically, the Giant King surpassed him in raw strength, meaning his only chance was a preemptive, overwhelming assault. He channeled his essence into the spear of lightning, a force so potent, it began to warp the very atmosphere and the clouds above. The spear ignited the sky into a crimson storm, raining down jagged bolts of black electricity, with a mere 10 of its potential unsealed. The protagonist's fatigue levels began to climb rapidly, but the legendary weapon started to take physical form in his grip. At 33 power, the shimmering silhouette of a lightning javelin became visible. It crackled with dark energy, and even extreme greed couldn't buffer the lethal strain on his body. Subaru realized his vessel was barely holding together. At 50 activation, his fatigue hit a critical 88. Moments later, he felt the monster's gaze lock onto him from the valley floor. With a display that loud, staying hidden was never an option. The Giant King completely ignored the blonde knight. Seeing the black lightning, he was certain that the figure on the peak was his son's murderer. Peli shouted, desperately trying to divert the Titan's focus back to himself. It was useless. The Titan ignored the lesser knights even as the village swarmed with smaller giants. The monarch's entire world narrowed down to the light atop the mountain. He imagined the final moments of his son, the agony the young giant must have endured. He charged like a force of nature, roaring that he would make the hero pay tenfold. For every ounce of that pain, trees were uprooted like grass in his wake. As the protagonist reached 88 charge, he knew this was his one and only shot at survival. He refused to blink, keeping his eyes glued to the center of the approaching mass. He recalled a tip from an old teammate. Never let your focus waver when the spear is in flight. The secret was to commit to a straight line and purge all doubt from the mind. The veteran had also taught him that the true power lies in the intent, not just the shape of the weapon, especially since Subaru was a cut above any ordinary warrior. He was, after all, the former Heart of Blue Eyes. With the skill primed at 95.2, Subaru felt the crushing weight of the moment. But he remembered the alternative for when a throw wasn't enough. Don't release it, detonate it at point-blank range. The stream's chat went into a total frenzy, begging the protagonist to fire the spear before he was trampled. But his gambit was to wait until the very last millisecond, as the Titan closed the distance, surging up the mountain slope. In a sudden burst of violence, the Titan lunged toward our hero. He crashed down directly onto the spot where Subaru stood. The hero locked his focus onto the beast, and as the charge neared 100, he prepared to strike. He knew he had only one shot at survival. He cast aside all doubt, fixated solely on making the hit count regardless of the price. His arms seared under the electrical friction, but he launched the spear just as the giant closed the distance. By waiting until the last moment, he left Rock no room to maneuver, piercing the monster's brow. The bolt detonated within the giant. He exploded in a flash of heat, and as he was incinerated, Rock's final act was a scream for his son that echoed until he vanished into ash. The live chat erupted in total disbelief at Subaru's impossible victory. With stage 7 conquered, the protagonist felt a massive surge across all his attributes. Alongside the level clear, he secured a rare treasure known as the Heart of Thunder. Before Subaru could even inspect it, the mysterious item activated on its own, unleashing a blinding, radiant pillar of light that consumed his vision. Suddenly, the protagonist's consciousness drifted, and he awoke in a spectral, unfamiliar realm. Emerging from the gloom, the towering silhouette of an ancient giant appeared. He tried to cry out in alarm, but his voice was trapped in his throat, paralyzed by an unseen force. He found his limbs completely unresponsive. Surrounding the central giant, several faceless phantoms materialized, their gazes fixed on Subaru. It felt as though these spirits were trying to transmit a forgotten memory to him. Suddenly, his hand pulsed with light, and a violent burst of energy shattered the vision. Back on the physical mountain, the system chimed to announce the start of a new main quest. It directed him to seek out hidden clues within the village using the Heart of Thunder. Subaru struggled to tell if this was reality or just another layer of the simulation. Shaking it off, he apologized for the radio silence and moved to the best part, collecting his hard-earned credits. His balance had skyrocketed to just over 40,000. Seeing this, the hero feigned exhaustion and promptly ended his broadcast for the day. Later, at a quiet bar in the starting city, he asked his manager if such a sudden exit was a bad move, but Hasuka beamed, noting she hadn't even given him the good news yet. She revealed that his stream had peaked at over 3,000 concurrent viewers. Subaru was floored, having been too buried in the life-or-death trial to check the metrics. The girl insisted that for a rookie's debut test, these numbers were practically legendary. The hero realized that a cliffhanger would only make the fans more desperate for the next stream. Subaru impressed her by suggesting they reveal the rare reward live with the fans to build more hype. Hasuka realized he was beginning to master the art of audience engagement. Encouraged, she told him she had prepared a special surprise for him, a golden opportunity that she was certain the protagonist wouldn't be able to turn down. She instructed the hero to look up a prominent streamer named Hawkeye. Subaru pulled up the channel and was instantly intrigued by what he saw. The broadcast had only just begun. The title was a hot debate on whether he was a Subaru copycat or the man himself. During the trial, Hawkeye had even placed a bounty on him. Hawkeye didn't mince words. He declared his audience that the protagonist was definitely the real Subaru under a new alias. The hero glanced at his manager, wondering if she shared that dangerous suspicion. Breaking the silence, Hasuka asked if she could pose a question that might sound a bit intrusive. She knew as a manager it was her job to probe, even if it felt socially awkward. She took a deep breath and decided to go through with it anyway. Hasuka asked why a player of his caliber chose the path of a streamer. She sensed his motivations ran deeper than just seeking a bit of pocket change. Subaru paused for a long moment. The silence made the girl's heart race with nervous anticipation. Finally, he bluntly stated that it was strictly for the money and nothing more. Hasuka felt a wave of secondhand embarrassment for overthinking it. She awkwardly agreed that financial stability is vital and apologized for prying. In an effort to pivot away from the awkwardness, she moved back to the topic of his professional growth. Hasuka shared some background on Hawkeye's reputation, explaining he was a veteran under contract and revealing their joint roadmap for Subaru's career. They had agreed on a profit-sharing model for reaction content. Subaru noted that this company seemed full of good news. As the girl blushed, he added that this partnership was far better than any standard bonus. With the details laid out, Hasuka asked if he was officially ready to collaborate with Hawkeye. Walking home, the protagonist's mind began to drift toward his public image. He wondered if he should ease up on a mask and stop being so obsessed with every single credit. He felt a bit exposed. The more people he met, the harder it became to keep his secrets guarded. Regardless, he used his 40,000 credits to push his extreme greed skill to level 4. Now, down to a mere 120 credits, he realized he'd need a fresh influx of cash soon. As he turned in for the night, he looked forward to the upcoming stream with Hawkeye. Before sleeping, he examined the mysterious flower he'd taken from the museum. thinking to himself that his silent partner likely already knew its secret. In her office at the agency, Hasuka buried her face in a pillow, squealing in private. Subaru's words had sent her into a state of pure, giddy excitement. She began inventing noble reasons for his greed, imagining he was supporting a sick family member. Lost in her own imagination, she screamed that she would stop being so nosy. Actually, the way Subaru had praised the company's good news had left a deep impression. She shouted her affection for him into her bedding, punching the mattress in a fit of joy. She drifted off convinced that Subaru was the most noble person she had ever met. A short while later, on the 7th floor of the tower, inside a grand fortress, a high-level warrior was pushing his body through an intense workout. All the while, he was focused on Hawkeye's latest broadcast. The analyst was busy comparing the new hero to the legendary Subaru of old. This comparison clearly rubbed the warrior the wrong way. He checked the comments and saw that no one even knew this streamer's true identity. An aide reported that the rookie was pulling in 8,000 views, reminding the Blue Zone elite that he had once commanded that same kind of attention during his own rise. When they discussed the player's skills, he noted that Subaru was being hailed as a master of lightning. Studying the archived footage, he admitted the technique was flawless, recalling Sakura Suhei's old mantra about total focus when throwing a spear. Amon explained he had modeled his entire style after the Blue Eyes Spearman, because every member of that legendary guild was a pinnacle of martial skill. He mused that the world had forgotten they were all monsters, and their sudden deaths remained a dark mystery. Amon grew tired of the speculation and signaled his subordinate to stop talking. He suspected the streamer was just using a dead hero's name to chase easy clout. He killed the screen, asking why he should waste his time on such a spectacle. The aide corrected him, stating it was a direct order from their guild leader. Lightning belongs to Blue Eyes, the progenitor of Blue Zone. The aide added they knew the hero was motivated by money. With a flourish, the subordinate pulled back a heavy cloth on the table, revealing a staggering pile of 100 solid gold bars. Amon was visibly stunned by the sight, not by the cost of the contract, but by the fact that Subaru preferred raw wealth over prestige. Meanwhile, back in the Lightning Path, the residents of the ruined city began the long, grueling task of rebuilding their lives. The Blonde Knight took charge, directing his squad to provide first aid and distribute essential medical supplies. His expression of heavy concern instantly brightened into a look of pure relief. The moment he caught sight of the protagonist returning from the heat of battle, Peli admitted they were terrified for his life when he collapsed at the village gates. The hero confessed he was still drained, a sentiment his friend acknowledged with a nod. Shifting the mood, the hero suggested they find a quiet place to debrief. The Blonde Knight agreed, suggesting they save the serious talk for a bit later. Subaru felt this was the right call, even as his live chat began jokingly shipping the two of them. Once he was back in his quarters, the protagonist began a meticulous review of his hard-won spoils. First up was the Heart of Electricity, a passive boost that bolsters lightning resistance and amplifies shock damage. His viewers analyzed his silent reaction, unable to tell if he was impressed or underwhelmed. Subaru was actually stunned. The item was a flawless fit for his build, a truly magnificent find. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts, and he signaled for his visitor to enter. The knight stepped inside, this time carrying a fresh basket of fruit as an offering. He inquired about Subaru's recovery with the doting care of a worried partner. Brushing aside the snacks, the two men dove straight into a serious discussion. Subaru asked if the ancient myths they had heard were actually based on fact. The Blonde Knight confirmed the grim reality and offered his sincere thanks once more. This prompted the hero to reveal his most mysterious discovery from the giant's remains, the legendary Heart of Thunder, an item that turned the knight's face pale with pure dread. Subaru asked if he recognized the artifact, but his friend quickly denied it. His clumsy attempt at hiding his shock didn't fool a single person in the chat, then Alice. She noted that while myths are often fairy tales, she distinctly remembered two specific prophecies. One foretold a Stormbringer who would topple the giants, which Subaru had just fulfilled. The second was an ancient chronicle from the dawn of time, a cosmic era when the gods themselves waged war against the giants for control of the lightning. It was a legend so old it felt like a myth within a dream. It detailed the crushing defeat of the giants, leading them to believe that Subaru's Heart of Thunder might have been a deliberate creation by a higher power. The architect behind it remained a mystery, but their intent seemed deliberate and calculated. Peli mused that it was a weapon designed to bridge the gap for humanity, a tool necessary to challenge both deities and titans. He saw it as the ultimate equalizer in a rigged game. As the conversation wound down, a system notification flashed. The lightning path was complete. He was awarded 17,000 achievement points, boosting his lightning mastery to level 3. As his body surged with light, Peli panicked. Before a word could be said, the protagonist vanished in a pillar of energy. Instantly, he was phased into the third floor, the bustling hub known as Ordinaro. He materialized directly onto the central arrival platform. Local players noted his arrival, but groaned at the sight of yet another masked, mysterious type. Narakami's channel. Hasuka sent a 1,000 credit tip as a congratulatory gift, but Subaru was too lost in nostalgia to notice. This very platform was where he had first crossed paths with Rina in his previous life. She had been a nervous wreck back then, having lost sight of her raiding party. She had asked if he'd seen any warriors with a tall build or notably large hands. The hero remembered it vividly. He had pointed her toward a distant alleyway, assuming her friends had headed that way. Rina had dashed off with a quick thank you, only to get completely turned around and lost again within mere seconds. Amused, the hero had offered to escort her until they reunited with her group. Rina's face had lit up with pure, unadulterated joy at the offer. It wasn't that he was idle. He just couldn't leave her to wander aimlessly. They had officially introduced themselves during that walk. But now, the memory was bittersweet. He wondered if leaving her to her own fate might have kept her alive. His chat sensed his heavy mood, but the hero kept his guilt locked away, offering no explanation. He simply announced a future collaboration with Hawkeye and promptly signed off. Sometime later, at a high-end eatery on the third floor, a distinguished figure approached Subaru's table, apologizing profusely for the wait. John had arrived in Hasuka's stead, as floor-to-floor travel is a grueling process for most. He introduced himself as the CEO of the agency, and Subaru noted he'd heard plenty from his manager. While he usually stays behind the scenes, John felt a personal need to meet the man who had managed to captivate Hasuka so thoroughly, the first since the legendary Blue Eyes Subaru. The CEO joked that the girl's standards were sky-high. Then his tone turned serious. He asked if Subaru had any personal interest in the legacy of the Blue Eyes Guild, catching the hero off guard, reading the subtle shift in the boy's posture. The blonde executive knew he had hit a nerve. This connection was precisely why John had sought this face-to-face meeting. He also mentioned that the grand prizes for the third-floor tournament would be revealed in 5 days. However, as the hero reviewed the details John provided, his blood began to boil with rage. Meanwhile, after the hero's stream went dark, Rina muttered a complaint about the sudden ending. Restless, she decided to clear her head with a walk through the forest surrounding their cabin. When she eventually caught up with Seeger, she asked if the day's chores were finally finished. The other girl gave a distracted nod of confirmation. Rina pushed for more, asking what was on her mind, and Seeger admitted she was at a crossroads. Standing before them were several assassins, currently incapacitated by ice. She was debating whether to end them then and there or show mercy. Rina didn't hesitate, telling her to finish it, but Seeger was conflicted. If Kazuki were behind this, he wouldn't send such weaklings, but sparing them posed a massive risk to Rina's safety. She wasn't about to let their secret hideout be compromised by a bunch of failed hitmen, drawing on her magical reserves. She summoned a row of lethal spectral blades from the earth. With a sharp gesture, she aligned the weapons into a firing formation. Pointing directly at the captives, Seeger tried to stop her, pleading for a moment of reason. But Rina was beyond listening. She sent the blades screaming toward the frozen warriors, wiping them out in a single, cold-blooded execution. Nothing remained but shards of melting ice. Rina argued that regardless of who sent them, they couldn't allow a single report to make it back. She chided her friend for being soft, telling her to stay sharp. Then, a notification pinged on Seeger's device. As Rina read the message over her shoulder, her shock quickly morphed into a terrifying fury. They were both disgusted, but Rina's rage was on another level entirely. They had found Tush's personal belongings listed for public auction. Seeger tried to calm her, pointing out it was a blatant lure to draw them out of hiding. But the disrespect was too much. They couldn't just stand by and watch his memory be sold. Rina nodded, the plan forming in her mind. Seeger confessed she wasn't suited for a stealth mission, but she knew her friend was a master of the shadows. Rina told her to save the chatter, already moving to prepare for the infiltration. But before she could disappear, Seeger caught her wrist, warning her not to let her anger lead her into a suicide mission. Would you like me to continue with the next part of this story? Strategically, it's better to reclaim the prize after a victor is named. Meanwhile, shifting back to the hero's talk, the item John presented, which caused the air to grow thick with tension, was those very same boots. He assumed Subaru would be intrigued, and indeed, the hero felt a desperate, burning desire to possess them. However, his motivation was far darker than the CEO could ever have imagined. John explained that the chance to win them depended entirely on the hero's performance. The president suggested that as a Subaru devotee, he could generate hype by questing for this relic. But the hero was inwardly seething that they had the audacity to use Tush's sacred memory as a mere trophy. Unable to read the hero's hidden fury, John began to feel a wave of inexplicable unease. Finally, Subaru agreed to play along with the proposed content strategy. This response allowed the president to breathe a small sigh of relief. Without further delay, the hero rose, announcing he would begin his preparations immediately. John called out words of encouragement, but Subaru didn't give him a second thought. His mind was focused solely on recovering that artifact at any cost, once back in his chambers. He contemplated the specific nature of the upcoming tournament. Subaru hoped for a solo bracket, but realized he couldn't control every variable of the event. Just then, a knock echoed at his door. His manager, Hasuka, had finally arrived. The hero stood up and instinctively reached for his mask to hide his features. The two met. Hasuka was dressed in professional attire, still radiating her characteristic shyness. The irony was that the hero remained hidden behind his mask throughout the entire encounter. Subaru gestured for the girl to step inside. The invitation sent the girl into a flurry of bashful nerves. Yet, she felt it would be unprofessional to conduct business in the hallway. So she entered, her cheeks flushed deep red, before they could exchange more than a few pleasantries. Hasuka noted that his living space was strikingly sparse and minimalist. The silence grew heavy, making her feel self-conscious, while the hero was busy analyzing her. He sensed a massive reservoir of mana within her, realizing she was far more than a simple office manager. Hasuka nervously asked if something was wrong, but the hero dismissed her concern. He quickly steered the conversation toward the details of the tournament. She apologized for the distraction and produced a thick stack of documentation. Hasuka clarified that the event would follow a high-stakes battle royale structure where many players would clash simultaneously to claim the ultimate prizes. Since it was an individual free-for-all, Hasuka noted the combat would occur within a specialized virtual zone. To enter, contenders must be at least level 3 and cover a 1,000 credit entry fee. She had already synchronized the digital files with his device, and upon checking his kit, he quickly absorbed all the critical tactical information. Subaru offered his sincere thanks, though she insisted she was merely fulfilling her duties. Furthermore, she inquired if he had reviewed the message from the director regarding an inquiry for Blue Zone. At that precise moment, the hero thought of that traitor Kyajuro Kazuki, and his entire frame began to shake with suppressed rage. The girl explained that the guild wanted a meeting and had formally reached out to the agency. They likely intended to lure him in with lucrative benefits, but Hasuka was stunned when Subaru told her to completely disregard their request. The hero firmly stated he had zero interest in joining their ranks or any other guild. This news made the girl jubilant, as if she'd won the lottery. She admitted she was terrified that a big guild would poach him away, but since he was staying put, Hasuka encouraged him to enjoy his upcoming stream with Hawkeye before happily taking her leave. Finally, observing an employee so incredibly dedicated to her work, Subaru developed a genuine respect for her, even if her true motivations remained a mystery to him. At a location designed like a grand digital arena, the president was waiting alongside the veteran streamer Hawkeye. The day's highlight was to be a skill comparison between the legendary Subaru and the rising star. Hawkeye found the concept entertaining, though John worried that a loss would be a PR disaster for the hero. However, the analyst had full faith in the skills he had analyzed, noting the hero remained undefeated. Ultimately, both men realized the success of the night rested solely on the hero's shoulders. Just then, the manager arrived to greet them, with Subaru following closely in her wake. Hawkeye was beaming, seeing this as a path to even greater fame, and extended a hand to the hero. Noticing the boy seemed somewhat preoccupied, he gave a formal self-introduction. The hero returned the greeting, and Hawkeye admitted he was a genuine fan despite the boy's rookie status. John suggested they move past the introductions and go live immediately. Hawkeye kicked off the stream with 1,300 viewers, offering a warm welcome to the audience. Instantly, the view count surged from 1,300 to a staggering 12,000, a thrilling but daunting spike. Regardless, he announced that the long-awaited collaboration was finally happening. Hearing his cue, the hero stepped into the frame to introduce himself, sparking a flood of comments about his face. Hawkeye joked that neither he nor the manager had been permitted a glimpse beneath the mask yet. The hero played along, playfully claiming he was quite the looker. Hawkeye felt his excitement rise as the energy of the broadcast reached a fever pitch. The vibe was electric, and when Subaru mentioned he was single, Hasuka let out a quiet sigh of relief. Without making the fans wait a moment longer, and with 20,000 viewers watching, they officially launched the combat trial. A series of floodlights flared to life as a swarm of battle droids flooded the arena floor. To provide context for the challenge, the streamer explained this was the ultimate benchmark for testing the hero's precision and control. And more importantly, it was a direct comparison to the original Subaru's standing record. When asked by the chat, the hero confidently stated he intended to shatter that record. Then, the previously dormant war machines suddenly hummed to life and charged the hero in a synchronized wave of steel. Despite his past feats, many in the chat remained doubtful he could surpass the legend. Skepticism clashed with hype, creating an incredibly intense atmosphere. One high roller posted a mission, 10,000 credits if the hero could dismantle 43 droids. He initially hesitated, as the penalty for failure was unmasking his face on stream. However, as other viewers piled on even more credits, Subaru finally accepted the dare. Since it was his channel, Hawkeye clarified that all credits earned would go directly to the hero. He told the hero to clear his mind and give the world a show to remember. The skirmish was set to last for exactly 3 minutes. Immediately, the killing machines swarmed towards Subaru. He ignited his lightning aura, tearing through several droids in a blur of motion. He caught one by the head and slammed it into the floor with bone-crushing force. The audience was stunned by his raw physical power, but then he unsheathed his demon sword. He cleaved through half a dozen foes in a single, devastating arc of steel. The chat was left speechless. Yet the droids continued to respawn, rushing the hero in endless waves. As the first minute ticked away, he vaulted over the heads of the machines, perfectly mirroring a maneuver from his past life. While suspended in midair, he gripped the hilt of his demon sword, funneled a massive surge of lightning into the blade, and struck the ground, vaporizing everything in the vicinity. In just half the allotted time, the hero had already secured 26 kills, closing in rapidly on the second-place ranking. The chat began to panic as the realization set in that their credits were about to be lost. With a mere 13 seconds remaining, Subaru had already reached a tally of 41 kills. And he relentlessly pushed forward, dismantling those automatons. With one final, decisive swing of his blade, he hit 42 kills. Exhaustion began to cloud his vision, and with a mere 3 seconds on the clock, he knew there was no room for hesitation. Summoning every ounce of his remaining willpower, the young warrior crushed one last foe. Then, silence. The timer hit 0. The arena scoreboard flashed a staggering 43 kills. The trial concluded, and while the hero didn't claim another life, by matching the legendary record, he has ascended to the throne, a landmark event that sent viewership soaring to 40,000. Hawkeye rushed onto the scene, stunned that the protagonist had actually equaled the score. He was nearly hyperventilating from the thrill, and the chat's skepticism shifted into profound admiration. Furthermore, the audience's respect for Hawkeye grew, seeing he was a true judge of talent, not just a hype man. Moving quickly, the streamer directed everyone to follow his profile for more live updates. Suddenly, a massive 10,000 credit tip from Reinhardt flashed across the screen, sending everyone but Hawkeye into a frenzy. Hawkeye couldn't even voice his gratitude before realizing a high-tier ranker was lurking in the stream, and Subaru knew exactly who it was. Attached to another generous gift, the ranker sent a message claiming he never missed a single broadcast. This made the protagonist suspect his father might have already unraveled his secret identity. Then, Reinhardt dropped a bombshell, an invitation for collaboration. The chat fell deathly silent at the magnitude of the offer. Behind the scenes, John and Hasuka were frantically gesturing for the hero to accept, but he flatly declined, stating his current objectives required his undivided attention. The refusal was so sudden, it practically made the hearts of the viewers stop. With that bombshell dropped, Subaru pivoted, asking his partner to handle the post-stream logistics. He then vanished from the arena without a single word of explanation. Backstage, John and Hasuka cornered him, demanding to know why he'd passed up such a chance. John emphasized that a collaboration with a ranker of that caliber is a once-in-a-lifetime miracle. However, the protagonist simply remarked that if rank was so vital, he'd just become a top ranker himself. Once again, a thick, heavy silence descended upon the room. Hawkeye broke the tension, assuring everyone it was fine and promising to transfer the earnings to the boys. But curiosity got the better of him, and he asked for one honest answer. The streamer noted that Subaru seemed to be holding back compared to his usual ferocity, a detail that caught Subaru off guard. Seeing no way to dodge the truth, he explained that either extreme outcome, winning or losing, would have been a headache. while the goal was to grow the channel. Shattering the ceiling too early would have backfired. Total dominance would bring instant fame, but kill the suspense of future challenges. And a loss would lead the public to label Subaru a hollow pretender. Thus, the hero chose the narrow path of neutrality. A tactical tie was the most calculated move. The streamer then asked if he truly possessed the power to surpass the old record. But Subaru opted to leave his friend guessing. After all, the history books were already written for that day. Now it was all down to public perception and the rumors that followed. Meanwhile, within the ranker's private estate, a fist slammed into a mahogany table with bone-breaking force. This was Reinhardt, the 121st ranked powerhouse on the world leaderboard and sovereign of the Golden Lion Guild. The moment Hawkeye cut the feed, a trembling subordinate entered the room, asking tentatively if anything was wrong. The blonde leader growled that he was beyond insulted by the rookie Subaru. Reinhardt hissed that the brat had dared to reject his personal invitation. He had planned to crush him publicly to silence the comparisons once and for all. The lost credits were nothing to him. It was the stain on his pride that burned. In the midst of the tension, the aide produced a high-end player kit, the master's personal device, and returned it to his trembling hand. Then, the blonde giant shifted his focus to a different task he'd assigned. He demanded an update on Isaac. The search was still ongoing, but the target had seemingly vanished into thin air days ago. Enraged by the incompetence, the ranker seized the subordinate by the throat, hoisting him off his feet. He snarled, asking if the man thought he could play games with him. The henchman gasped for air, and at the last moment, the brute hurled him against the stone wall. The man crumpled to the floor in agony, but Reinhardt stood over him, demanding to know if he had any objections to his treatment. Of course not. In that very instant, the man began groveling on his knees, begging for one last chance to prove himself. By the following morning, Hasuka looked utterly drained when she dialed her boss. When he answered, she offered a faint greeting, but John immediately snapped at her. He scolded her for sounding so defeated during such a pivotal conversation. John continued his relentless lecture, but the girl steered the talk toward the potential Reinhardt collaboration. She questioned if it was a bridge they truly needed to cross, but the boss's stance was immovable. Hasuka knew she had to find a way to sway his perspective. To be fair, John respected the protagonist's combat-first mentality as a player, but the girl ended the call abruptly, having already formulated her own plan. She believed this was the breakthrough the hero deserved, so she prepared to make her case in person. When the doorbell finally chimed, the protagonist answered, appearing surprisingly relaxed. Yet, the mask remained firmly in place, hiding his true identity. Subaru playfully asked if she was there for a face reveal. She denied it, but then began talking so rapidly that it was obvious she was dying of curiosity. The hero then mused why the world was so fixated on the name Subaru. Hasuka replied that perhaps it was his underdog story, his innate kindness, or the fact that he represented everyone's hope. The girl explained that the protagonist might not grasp the weight of history, but during the first era of the tower climb, there was only desolation, monsters in every shadow, with no resources to speak of. Survival was a statistical impossibility, but as legends climbed, they generated credits and hope. Humanity carved a civilization into this void. It was those pioneers who proved the tower could be tamed. They made it a world people could actually inhabit. And the man who stood at the center of that revolution was Narukami Subaru. His legacy wasn't just the floors he cleared, but the fact that he was the first to show it could be done. The hero asked if she shared that idolization, but she gave a mysterious smile, saying some things are meant to be secrets. Just like the man behind a mask. Regardless, Subaru apologized for the long talk at the door and finally invited her inside. Her face turned crimson as she stammered that she had urgent business to attend to. And with that, she beat a hasty retreat. She had failed to bring up the collab, and her embarrassment was doubled because he invited her in every single time. Later that day, the hero launched his stream, and a tidal wave of messages flooded the screen. Fans were bombarding him with donations, all centered on a rumored collaboration. Everyone was dying to know which faction he'd support on the third floor, paying for any scrap of intel as the new trial began. The system presented a fork in the road, the Ottoman Empire or the Kingdom of Conrad, a choice that would dictate his path, as the two were sworn enemies. To the shock of his viewers, the hero chose the Kingdom of Conrad, the side supported by only 3 of the player base. At the Conrad mercenary outpost on the third floor, the protagonist stepped inside, and the atmosphere shifted as all eyes fell on him. A group of thugs was already looming, waiting to give a newcomer a violent welcome. He stepped into the hero's path and intentionally collided with his shoulder. The twist was the one who went flying back was the bully himself. He nearly ate dirt, stumbling as if he'd just walked into a solid brick wall. The thug roared, demanding to know where the hero was going and what kind of freak he was. The hero calmly retorted that the guy was the one with the problem for walking into him. Infuriated, the man lunged and snatched Subaru's collar, ready to deliver a beating. This was Van Cho, a notorious predator who specialized in shaking down E-rank mercenaries. He boasted about his B-rank status, but the protagonist didn't even flinch. Subaru channeled lightning through his legs and launched a devastating kick that connected perfectly with the bully's jaw. The man was sent airborne, limp as a discarded rag doll. The moment he hit the floor, the entire tavern fell into a stunned silence. Fear rippled through some, while others were intrigued, but Van Cho's crew was seething. Driven by cowardice, they swarmed the hero all at once, hoping to overwhelm him with numbers. Unfortunately for them, adding more weaklings to the pile didn't change the outcome. Subaru systematically dismantled them all, leaving the gang in a heap. Finally, an observer who had been watching with interest stepped forward to offer praise. He introduced himself as Raymond, a high-ranking A-rank adjudicator. The man asked how an E-ranker possessed such skill, but the hero played it down as nothing special. The objective on the third floor is to take on mercenary contracts and accumulate a total of 10,000 achievement points. The catch is that an E-rank mission only yields a pitiful 50 points. At that rate, most players remain stuck on this floor for an entire year. Raymond guessed the hero was an outworlder, noting his rare potential. However, he insisted he couldn't grant shortcuts, especially since he was retiring. Subaru had a faster strategy in mind and decided to pitch it. He claimed he could fulfill a dream shared by many, bringing the Thunder Cave under Conrad's banner. Raymond nearly choked. Only the elite A-rank mercenaries dared to even look at that place. But the hero understood that this was more than a quest. It was a battle for national pride. The Thunder Cave is a legendary trial on the third floor that remains unconquered to this day. It sits atop a massive peak that both kingdoms have bled over for decades. Securing the cave means controlling the mountain pass, providing an absolute strategic military edge. The hero offered a deal. He would conquer the cave in exchange for an immediate rank promotion. Raymond hesitated, realizing the boy might be trying to exploit a desperate situation. The hero, meanwhile, mentally prepared to bypass the old man if he proved to be an obstacle. It wasn't necessary. Raymond eventually agreed to provide a formal letter of recommendation. In any raid, raw power is a commodity that simply cannot be ignored. Raymond told the protagonist to prepare to join the main expedition group in 5 days. Suddenly, the hero's top 3 donors sent 35,000 credits, demanding he clear the dungeon solo. The timing was terrible. The 5-day wait would clash with the tournament's conclusion. As for Raymond, he was still shaking his head in disbelief at the boy's confidence. He admitted he had attempted the cave in his youth and lost half his team. Then, he handed over the letter. The hero told him history wouldn't repeat itself because he was going in alone. Raymond barked that he was suicidal, as the minimum safe requirement was a 20-man elite squad. Subaru managed to calm the old man's nerves with a few choice words. He used the excuse that he didn't want to waste their soldiers' lives and lacked a permanent team, for now. Watching from a high mountain ridge, Rena mused that the hero's resemblance to the original Subaru was becoming uncanny. She monitored his stream as he announced he would be declining all standard missions. In fact, he declared he would be taking a hiatus from broadcasting for a short while. The screen went black just as Rena reached the third floor. Her eyes narrowed in thought. She found the situation ironic. The Real Subaru was notorious for that exact brand of spontaneity. He had always been a law unto himself. It was as if her legendary former leader had been reincarnated as an influencer. Knowing he would be at the tournament, she decided that would be the perfect moment to confront him. Deep down, she secretly hoped he wouldn't manage to secure that specific memento. Later, back on the third floor, Hasuka was full of praise for her star talent. She laughed, saying the protagonist had perfectly captured Subaru's enigmatic aura. Taking on boring, low-level jobs would have definitely killed his channel's momentum. When she asked about his immediate plans, he said he'd be grinding in the wild until the tournament. He needed to push his current lightning capacity to its absolute limit, and he was determined to win the fight to keep his teammates' legacy out of the wrong hands. That afternoon, Jinzaki Nato from the Blue Zone Guild came looking for Subaru. He was visibly annoyed at the mere prospect of having to negotiate with him. He didn't care about the lightning mastery rumors. He just hated being stuck on such a low floor. When he entered the designated bar, John was already there, enjoying a cold beer. They sat down, and the president made it clear he was well aware of why. Jinzaki was so desperate to get in touch with his star streamer. Jinzaki's temper flared the second he realized the protagonist wasn't attending the meeting. John explained he was away on personal errands, but the Blue Zone representative refused to believe anything could be more important than his guild's interests. Regardless, the president reminded him of the hero's public rejection of all guilds. Jinzaki insisted on a face-to-face meeting to offer a deal the kid couldn't refuse. He began to suspect that John was intentionally acting as a gatekeeper to prevent the deal. Jinzaki slammed his fist down, accusing John of trying to hoard the ultimate golden goose. He argued that a legendary guild was a much better future than being a digital puppet. John stood his ground, noting that Jinzaki was famous for preying on independent creators. Jinzaki warned him not to make an enemy of a powerhouse like Saturn through the agency's actions. But John countered that they would always back their employees' freedom above all else. Jinzaki scoffed, telling the president he was being dangerously idealistic for this world. John stood up, releasing a sliver of his hidden aura that felt like a cold blade. He told the younger man to get out before things turned ugly. Jinzaki was instantly smothered by the weight of the president's true power. He stood up, his knees trembling despite his best efforts to stay composed. He shouted a final protest, claiming John couldn't just dismiss him like trash. The president didn't even look up from his drink. Jinzaki snarled a final warning that the old man would live to regret this insult. John just smirked, mocking him for being so transparently terrified. 3 days later, deep within the third floor's flying snake nest, the area had been turned into a scene of absolute carnage. Since he wasn't streaming, the hero had removed his mask for more comfort. He tracked down the alpha of the nest, a serpent of monstrous proportions. With a single strike, he tore a gaping wound through the beast's upper jaw. The monster let out a shrill, agonizing hiss. The hero casually sheathed his blade and decided he'd seen enough of its patterns. He lunged, ready to end the struggle. The protagonist dove into the monster's maw and detonated a massive surge of electricity, ending the reign of the flying snake boss instantly. The victory pushed the protagonist's level and stats even higher. He looted a rare snake fang valued at 10,000 credits. Subaru had now reached level 35. He had vaulted through 9 levels in just 3 days, an incredible feat of grinding. With that task finished, he realized he had one more lingering issue that required his attention. The following morning, Hasuka greeted the protagonist with a beaming smile. He took a seat and inquired if she had some uplifting news to share. The girl confirmed with a nod, her expression glowing with pure delight. The protagonist, however, remained completely in the dark about the reason for her joy. He eventually realized it concerned their collaboration and offered a quick apology. Hasuka didn't hold his previous refusal against him. She noted that such a stubborn streak was a trait Subaru himself would have shown, but to achieve true parity. She presented a file highlighting the singular gap that remained between the two of them. It was actually a financial report from the joint stream with Hawkeye, a cool 49,000 credits in earnings. Hasuka mentioned she could have sent the funds digitally, but she preferred a face-to-face conversation. She shared that she had an acquaintance named Seijin, a betting enthusiast who had taught her the ropes of the industry. Essentially, he specialized in win-loss odds. Where the probability of success is high, the payout is naturally lower. However, those safe bets also provided a much more reliable stream of income. With this in mind, Hasuka revealed the hero's current payout ratio was 6-1, whereas a rival player sat at 1.2. This positioned that specific individual as the overwhelming favorite to win it all. When a hero asked for a name, the girl identified the frontrunner as Oma Schneider, a veteran from Blue Zone who had spent 15 years on the 3rd floor, obsessed with conquering the Thunder Cave. Hasuka warned that Oma was undoubtedly hunting for the hero. After all, Subaru's public claim that he would clear the dungeon solo was essentially a slap in the face to the man's 15 years of grueling dedication. The hero broke the tension by pointing out that the girl was leaning uncomfortably close to him. This realization left Hasuka more flustered and embarrassed than ever before. She scurried back to her chair and told Subaru to stay focused on his training. Elsewhere on the 3rd floor in Ortina, a pair of horses pulled a carriage at a breakneck pace. They finally reached the rendezvous to meet the arrogant brat who claimed he'd solo the cave. Several peers inside argued the kid was just naive, urging Captain Schneider to keep his cool. The captain insisted he wasn't offended, acknowledging the hero had actually built quite a following. Despite being a newcomer, he was already being hailed as the next master of lightning. Even so, his fellow warriors scoffed that Subaru was a mere shadow of the original and would inevitably fail. However, the captain declared that there was no room for petty jealousy or resentment right now. A subordinate asked if they should show the kid some respect, and Schneider admitted it might come to that. But for all his outward composure, a vein of anxiety was clearly pulsing beneath the surface. The bald warrior was the most unnerved, knowing the terrifying beast the captain became when provoked. While scanning Schneider's dossier, the hero thought the man was obsessed, considering he himself had only left that floor 5 years ago. One report claimed they were on the verge of victory, and now, with more intel on his rival. Subaru recognized exactly why the man was considered the top seed. Regardless, he sent a silent apology to Kazuki, because now that he had returned, he would let absolutely nothing block his path to the top. The next day, at the bustling city market, a shopkeeper turned up his nose, claiming he couldn't possibly stock such low-grade scrap. He informed the hunter that he would only offer a measly 500 credits for the lot. He acted as if he were doing the man a favor and nearly walked away from the deal. In reality, he was attempting to swindle the customer, being the only one who knew the item's true worth. Then, another client stepped up, one who was far sharper than the last. When Subaru laid the massive snake thong on the counter, the merchant nearly leaped out of his skin. The quality was flawless, leaving the man with nothing to criticize. However, the merchant wasn't about to let a chance for a massive markup slip through his fingers. He appraised the material as B rank, deviously claiming it would have hit S rank if not for a tiny blemish. Furthermore, he lied that the protagonist's timing was poor because his inventory was already overflowing with identical fangs. With breathtaking audacity, he offered 8,000 credits as if he were gifting a fortune. To his surprise, Subaru actually thought the price was fair based on his own outdated memories of the market. Suddenly, Schneider intervened, stating the thong was worth at least 15,000 and calling out the merchant's blatant lies. Standing face to face for the first time, the captain and the protagonist exchanged a formal greeting. Shortly after, they moved to a rather eccentric local restaurant. The two men sat down, wasting no time on pleasantries to get straight to business. After all, they weren't there on a social date to relax and trade stories. Subaru still found it hard to believe that this was the kind of establishment Schneider would choose for a meal. The conversation shifted rapidly toward the Thunder Dungeon, where Subaru reiterated his absolute intent to conquer the zone entirely on his own. Schneider's temper flared, noting that many rookies arrive on the third floor with an ego far larger than their skill. Subaru asked point-blank if the captain viewed him as just another boastful amateur. The captain admitted the thought had crossed his mind, though he acknowledged the hero's undeniable raw talent. Still, he refused to believe the boy could ever fill the original Subaru's shoes, the protagonist realized. He wasn't just dealing with some eccentric weirdo, but a man of intense, disciplined conviction. Cutting to the chase, the captain put forward a final proposal. Gritting his teeth, he demanded that the hero retract his arrogant claims immediately. Schneider finally let his frustration boil over, calling the kid's solo-run ambition a height of hubris. He offered him a graceful exit, go live on stream, and issue a public apology for the boast. The hero countered that he found that proposal quite lacking. In response, the captain vowed to crush the kid in the tournament and force him to understand the true hierarchy of power. He stormed out, leaving the hero to reflect that Schneider hadn't spent 15 years in the trenches for nothing. Over at Salton Entertainment, Sagan nearly fell out of his chair when he saw the live viewer count surge past 10,000. He was glued to the screen for the tournament's opening ceremonies. He felt a pang of envy, unable to join the fray since he had already progressed far beyond the third floor. Even with the hero as an ally, Sagan's analytical side told him the smart money was on the captain. Yet, as a seasoned gambler, he knew that following the herd was a fool's errand. You have to bet on your convictions. The problem was, he began to sweat bullets, terrified of making a catastrophic betting error. Just as he reached out to hedge his bets, he fumbled an incoming call and accidentally sent his phone flying across the room. Realizing he had locked in his bet on Subaru, Seijin shrieked that Hasuka was surely haunting his every move. The girl's voice came through, simply asking what in the world he was panicking about. Seijin tried to play it cool, acting as if he weren't deep in a gambling hole. But the girl was only interested in the stakes, insisting they should go all in on Subaru's victory. The man told her not to be so reckless. Real profit requires cold analysis before laying down a single credit. Sagan yelled that Schneider was the only logical choice compared to Hasuka's crush. Hasuka wouldn't budge, betting her entire next month's wages just to prove him wrong. Mid-argument, a hooded figure caught her eye in the crowd, causing her to lose her train of thought. She hung up without another word, leaving the line dead. Seijin was left baffled. She was never the type to initiate a high-stakes wager like that. Deep in the heart of the city center, an aide asked for a description of the hero's true nature. Schneider admitted that the boy was certainly no novice, but maintained that only a direct clash in the arena would reveal the absolute truth. And in his heart, Schneider didn't believe for a second that defeat was even a possibility. From the shadow of a high rooftop, a hooded observer watched the scene unfold. She had come to scout the top contender of the upcoming games. It was Rina, and she offered a quiet word of praise for the guy's younger sister. Finally, the day of the grand tournament arrived. A massive tide of people converged on the great arena of Octonero. Would you like me to summarize the next chapter of the tournament for you? Our hero had already taken his position within the arena. He stood poised and ready, looming just inside the main entrance. As he finally stepped into the light, he was met by the roar of a massive, expectant crowd. The spectators seemed stunned by his entry. Most were already planning to bet on him for a mere runner-up spot. Suddenly, the tournament favorite emerged, a lethal spear strapped firmly to his back. The captain looked perfectly prepared for the slaughter. The stadium erupted in cheers, a testament to his legion of fanatical supporters. Among the hundreds in attendance, not one voice called for the hero. The air belonged solely to Schneider. As the first fireworks painted the sky, a poised woman stepped forward. It was Mizuha of the Blue Zone Guild. Acting as the official master of ceremonies, she announced the transition from the qualifiers into the main bracket, noting that the ultimate prize awaited only the finalist. She revealed that the legendary boots were forged by the divine hands of Hermes himself, proclaiming them the crown jewel of the guild and the sacred relic of the late Hibiki Tusha. With a surge of magic, she summoned the artifact, displaying its radiance for all to see. The hero sent a silent, solemn vow to the spirit of Tusha, promising that he wouldn't have to wait much longer to see his treasure returned. Deep in the spectator stands, Hasuka was busy rooting for him with everything she had, hoping against hope that he would find a moment to go live. Coincidentally, the mysterious hooded figure from before was seated right beside her. Hasuka felt a jolt of recognition, certain this was the same stranger she'd encountered earlier. True to the manager's hunch, the protagonist launched his livestream right as the action commenced. In less than 10 seconds, 3,000 viewers had already swarmed the broadcast. He offered a quick apology for his absence, noting he wouldn't be able to engage with the chat during the heat of battle. Hasuka immediately set a 30,000 credit bounty for a victory, and he thanked her despite the lack of mainstream support. Mizuha signaled the start with a command for more pyrotechnics. The tournament was officially underway. She gathered a swirling mass of deep blue mana between her palms and projected a gargantuan sphere of energy high into the atmosphere. The girl detonated the orb, raining down a cascade of shimmering magic. The sapphire glow washed over the entire arena. The crowd marveled at the display of raw power, in essence. She had eclipsed the sun and turned day into night with a mere flick of her wrist. In the artificial twilight, the brutal elimination round began. The system issued a grim warning. Death meant instant disqualification. The round would only conclude once the 10,000 entrants were whittled down to a mere 1,000. Every soul was now a target. Logic dictated that no one would be foolish enough to hunt the hero so early. However, as he tried to conserve his mana, viewers began donating credits, demanding he go on a farming spree. Suddenly, a bold attacker attempted to creep up on the hero's blind side. The assassin quickly turned tail, realizing that engaging in a direct fight would be his end. To the hero, the retreating figure looked like nothing more than a walking bag of loot. Soon, 1,500 players were gone, and the feed switched to the captain. He wasn't interested in harvesting the weak. His eyes were set solely on finding and breaking the hero. An arrow suddenly whistled past, nearly grazing his cheek. A hidden sniper had taken a desperate shot, and it had come dangerously close to connecting. But it wasn't a lone gunman. The sniper wasn't that reckless. He was backed by an entire coordinated squad of mercenaries. A bald subordinate suggested they retreat, but the leader was confident that overwhelming numbers would secure the kill. Schneider smirked at the tactic, admitting it was clever, though they had targeted the wrong man. Another bald mercenary rushed in first to test his luck. Before he could even finish his battle cry, his head was cleanly severed from his shoulders. The body hit the dirt, sending a shockwave of terror through the remaining mercenaries. The movement was so fast that no one saw the captain's spear even leave its position. Schneider was bored of these stubborn weaklings and was ready to show them a truly violent conclusion. For the sin of attempting to touch him, he struck again, sending another mercenary to a gruesome, explosive end. He warned the survivors that cheap tricks held no weight within the tower's walls. In this place, the only shield between a man and his grave is his own raw power. The enemies were paralyzed with absolute dread. The captain's brutal efficiency was being broadcast live to the entire stadium. He carved through several more mercenaries in one fluid, rhythmic motion. A few tried to rally their comrades, shouting that it was only a test, but the panic was total. From her vantage point, Rina realized that the captain was playing an entirely different game. He had the potential to be a legendary ranker as he ascended the tower. However, she found her focus drifting because Hasuka, seated right next to her, was screaming and cheering for the protagonist at the top of her lungs. Curious, Rina glanced over and realized she was watching Subaru's perspective. She struck up a conversation, noting the girl was wearing a mask that mirrored the hero's own. Rina claimed to be a fan. Hasuka warmly returned the greeting, happy to meet a fellow supporter. But the manager couldn't help but ask for the name of the girl hidden beneath the hood. With only 1,300 survivors left, the chat informed the hero he had already claimed 97 kills. Time was short, and he was racking up 200 credits for every opponent he sent to the sidelines. But then, a bold idea took root in the hero's mind. He decided to create a massive disturbance to draw in more prey. Combining his sword skills with a surge of lightning, he leveled the surrounding forest to broadcast his exact coordinates. He shattered the earth, clearing a massive radius around where he stood. The ruckus was loud enough to reach the captain's ears. After finishing off the last of the mercenaries, he followed the sound and found the protagonist. But the hero corrected him, claiming he was the one who had lured the captain in. Accepting the challenge, Schneider suggested they settle their grudge right here and now, prompted by a 10,000 credit viewer reward to take the captain down. Subaru braced for impact. Only 202 participants remained before the qualifier would end. Schneider wasted no time, launching a lightning-fast spear thrust at the hero. Subaru dodged, but the shockwave pulverized everything in the attack's path. The captain noted that there was still just enough time for a proper execution. Subaru felt a flicker of concern, realizing that devastating blow was backed only by pure physical strength. He knew a direct hit would be fatal, and the spear's reach was incredibly oppressive. The captain lunged with a second, more focused assault. The protagonist reacted, drawing on his magic sword to overcharge his physical limits. Using the boost, he narrowly parried the strike and slipped past the spear's point. He closed the gap, charging directly into the captain's inner circle. Schneider pivoted instantly, trying to intercept the hero with even more speed. Subaru managed to weave through the flurry of strikes, but every time he tried to maneuver behind his opponent, he was met with a relentless, punishing wall of counterattacks, finally finding an opening to strike back. The protagonist forced the captain to skid backward across the arena floor. The two fighters reset, creating a brief pocket of space between them. Schneider questioned why the kid was holding back his signature lightning magic. The hero smirked, replying that it wasn't necessary yet, as he planned to end the fight in a heartbeat. Schneider's eyes narrowed, insulted by the suggestion that he could be defeated so easily. "Would you like me to continue and show you how this clash ends?" He bellowed, demanding to know if the kid was just stalling to avoid an early knockout. The captain lunged, determined to wipe the hero out of the competition instantly. The protagonist parried the blow, mockingly asking if that was truly the best Schneider could do. The taunt sent the man into a blind, white-hot rage. Suddenly, the survivor count hit exactly 1,000, signaling the end of the qualifiers. Schneider lowered his weapon, telling the hero to savor his breath for a few more minutes. Both retreated to the staging area, where a system alert announced a 30-minute intermission. Subaru's hand pulsed with a faint tremor from the force of that final collision. It was a sobering realization. He had definitely underestimated the captain's raw power. He recalled Hasuka mentioning that 10,000 live viewers could secure a streamer's future. Now, thanks to the hype surrounding Schneider, he had finally hit that golden milestone. Yet, the captain's obsession with the cave weighed on him. The man was a beast even without clearing it. Dawn broke over the quiet log cabin nestled deep within the forest. Seeger was pacing restlessly, battling a severe bout of existential boredom. She grumbled about Schneider's stagnation, baffled that such a powerhouse was still idling on the third floor. She knew the level gap was harder to bridge on lower floors, even for a lightning wielder like Subaru. Seeger understood that innate brilliance could often rewrite the rules of combat. However, looking at the current state of affairs, she remained skeptical. During the lull, the protagonist cashed in his credits, dumping 80,000 points into the greedy bet skill. This investment surged the ability to level 5, officially propelling him to B-rank status. Since his stats remained hidden, the spectators in the arena could only speculate on his growth. Near the podium, Mizuha stood guard, her gaze fixed intently on the tournament prize. Rumors of a high-profile thief targeting the legendary shoes had reached her ears. Whispers regarding the culprit's identity were already circulating through the shadows. A messenger arrived to report that guild reinforcements had landed, and Mizuha demanded to know the lead. The newcomer stepped forward, introducing himself with professional confidence. The girl looked him over, questioning why he had bothered descending to the third floor. The man standing before her, ready to assist, was none other than Kirikawa. Mizuha asked if the guild leader held a grudge against Subaru. He confirmed it for both himself and Schneider. He added a cryptic warning that a far more pressing issue was lurking nearby. That problem was currently engaged in a tense conversation up in the stands. Behind the safety of her mask, Rina was mentally reeling from the staggering amount of mana radiating from Asuka. She was desperate to uncover why a powerhouse of this magnitude was posing as a mere manager. To avoid suspicion, she lowered her hood, introducing herself under the alias Tame. Asuka admitted her polite tone was a reflexive response to the other girl's overwhelming aura. She quickly deduced that Rina was employing a sophisticated face-altering spell. Rina felt a chill of danger, wondering if this manager was an elite assassin dispatched by Kazuki. Asuka, though reluctant to interfere, asked point-blank if there was a plot to wreck the finals. Sensing a trap, Rina chose to respond with vague, non-committal riddles. With a sudden, lethal edge to her voice, Asuka warned that any interference would lead to a painful regret. Just then, the system chimed, announcing the conclusion of the 30-minute grace period. The time for rest had officially expired. In a flash of light, all remaining contestants were warped into the arena for the final round. The interface revealed the endgame, a high-stakes game of territory conquest. Mizuha clarified that every player would start with a single plot of land. Only 2 people could occupy a square at once, with choices to defend, plunder, or hold their ground. Defeating an adversary allowed a player to seize control of their entire territory. The contender holding the largest domain at the buzzer would claim the legendary shoes, with the guidelines laid bare for all to see. The girls signaled the start, assigning a unique color code to every participant. As the hero suspected, the majority of the field stayed put, playing a cautious defensive game. Most figured that early aggression was a waste. It was better to let others accumulate land before striking. While the rest hesitated, the hero bolted forward, instantly eliminating his first target. His subscribers were paying 300 credits per kill, making speed his top priority. Meanwhile, across the map, the captain also ignored the defensive meta, aggressively expanding his reach. A nearby player began to panic as his borders were breached. He didn't even have time to scream before the spear point found its mark. In a matter of seconds, Schneider had already wiped out 10 competitors. He scanned the battlefield for Subaru, looking past the chaos, until his eyes locked onto a rapidly growing cluster of yellow territories. Amidst the surrounding frenzy, the 2 rivals blocked out the world, zeroing in on one another. Unexpectedly, Subaru turned his back and began walking in the opposite direction. Schneider roared at him across the arena, calling him a pathetic coward for refusing the confrontation. The hero's fans were fuming, frustrated by his apparent retreat. However, he calmly explained he would deal with the captain once he had farmed more credits. Subaru continued his territorial harvest, unimpressed by the low skill level on this floor. Then, a player by the name of John Trejo breached his perimeter. It was the captain's loyal, bald-headed lieutenant. John Trejo bragged that he was going to get a lecture later for stealing the brat's kill himself. The chat quickly alerted Subaru that this intruder was a high-ranking member of Blue Zone. The lieutenant lunged with a heavy strike, forcing the hero into a defensive stance. Subaru slipped beneath the swing with feline grace, his blade shearing through the lieutenant's spear. With a fluid motion, he slammed the man into the dirt, effectively ending the fight. Knowing this was a digital battlefield, he showed no mercy in the execution. He finished him right then and there. Subaru dispatched the lieutenant so effortlessly that the chat began to mock the elite guild's weakness. Finally, Schneider himself stepped into the protagonist's yellow mark zone. He didn't wait for a system alert. He charged the hero like a landslide. The protagonist held his ground. He deflected a spear thrust aimed at his skull, only for the captain to pivot for a second strike. Schneider barked at the hero to stop playing games and unleash his lightning. He warned that if the boy kept holding back, the next blow would be his last. The protagonist leaped backward, creating a tactical pocket of space. He let his hand rest casually on the hilt of his sword. Schneider sneered, asking if he was planning another flight, but Subaru replied that he was finally going to give the captain exactly what he'd been begging for. He summoned a torrent of electricity, using the Heart of Thunder to overcharge his power and durability. Furthermore, the passive buffs from extreme greed shielded him from the self-inflicted strain. Schneider watched in disbelief as the hero forged a weapon made purely of crackling lightning. The hero asked if he still looked like a man who was running away. When the captain remained silent, Subaru pressed him with one final, piercing question. He asked if it was actually Schneider who wanted to turn tail and flee the arena now. Confident that surviving this exchange would mean his victory, the captain stood his ground. Earlier that day, the bald lieutenant had asked a very personal question. He'd asked why the boss was so stuck on the Thunder Cave despite having the power to move on, but Schneider had no easy answer. He mused that people often lose sight of the original reason for their own stubbornness. Whether it was pure faith or a dark obsession, the captain was convinced his life would transform once he conquered it. That singular conviction was the only reason he refused to ever back down. Back in the present, the climactic battle between the two reached its breaking point. The warrior whirled his spear to build momentum, realizing that Subaru might just become his next grand obsession, before lunging forward to strike the final, crushing blow. Out of respect for the captain's 15-year grind, Subaru charged back with zero restraint. The two titans collided, and their ultimate techniques clashed with staggering force. The impact triggered a massive explosion, leveling the surrounding arena. But as the dust settled, the captain's violet aura vanished, eclipsed by the hero's radiant gold. Meanwhile, up in the spectator stands, the girls fell silent as the vibe shifted. Rina grew increasingly wary of Hasuka. But Hasuka made it clear she was ready for a fight because she was Subaru's dedicated manager. Naturally, any sabotage of the tournament threatened his stream and her livelihood. Rina turned into an excited fangirl upon learning she was talking to the hero's right hand. Hasuka beamed with pride, admitting it was tough convincing her peers she'd discovered a diamond in the rough. Rina confessed she was a loyal viewer, and a bond of mutual understanding formed between them. Suddenly, the screen flickered as the colossal blast from the duel became the sole focus of the broadcast. Hasuka dashed toward the railing, her heart racing with worry over the outcome. As the smoke finally cleared from the epicenter, both combatants remained standing, locked in a tense stalemate. However, Schneider was catastrophically wounded, with a jagged hole torn through his torso. He finally buckled, his breathing stopped, and his strength faded away. Subaru looked down, hoping their paths might cross again in a future trial. With a staggering count of 283 zones under his control, Narukami, Subaru was officially crowned the tournament champion. The sky erupted in fireworks as the crowd went wild with excitement. Hasuka tried to celebrate with her new companion, but the girl seemed strangely distant. Rina stood frozen, unable to process that the protagonist had actually seized the ultimate prize. Mizuha took center stage once more to make the official proclamation. Calling for silence, she announced to the world, Subaru is the victor. With a flourish, she summoned the legendary boots, the hero's hard-won treasure. At that moment, Rina stood up in a huff and stormed out of the stands without a word. The ancient seal shattered, and the relic finally landed in Subaru's grasp. A wave of nostalgia hit him. It had been 25 long years since they were last together. He remembered a simple afternoon from 2.5 decades ago. Tasha had been fuming, shouting at the top of his lungs about his missing footwear. A classmate teased him for being so cranky, all while trying to shove the tiny boots onto his own oversized feet, despite being warned not to touch the sacred gear. Tasha sent the thief flying with a kick, and the whole room erupted in laughter. Subaru had been laughing right along with them. In a live chat, some mercenaries urged him to flip the item for a fortune, but he flatly refused to sell, leaving the host completely bewildered. Mizuha pointed out he could walk away with millions, yet the hero wouldn't budge. Immediately, wealthy bidders began a frantic war to name the highest price. One high roller in the audience even shouted an offer of 4 million credits. In response, the protagonist called down a terrifying bolt of lightning from the heavens. Having displayed his overwhelming elemental might, he declared that even 10 million credits wouldn't tempt him to part with them. With his final word delivered, the hero turned his back and exited the arena. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, Iman and another high-level player had just finished watching the stream. The man was left speechless by the protagonist's flawless victory. Hanamaki Hayori mused that at this pace, the hero was becoming the true Subaru, especially lately. The public consensus was shifting. Many believed the newcomer outshone the legend. Hanamaki noted how everyone was comparing the two, but to Iman's eyes, there was clearly a hidden hand orchestrating this surge in popularity. Hanamaki secretly suspected they were the same person, but since Iman was so dismissive, she internally labeled him a stubborn fanboy. Regardless, she asked if he was hyped for the main event about to unfold. He replied coldly, stating they had a job to do, hunting down the thief targeting the boots, exuding an aura of pure authority. Iman walked away, leaving the girl behind. Though in this world, no one stays truly solitary for long. Back on the stream, the viewers were obsessed with the stats of the legendary footwear. Holding them again, Subaru felt a deep sense of peace. He thanked his fans for the mission rewards. The boots, known as Teleria, grant a 25 speed boost and increased jump height by 15. The audience debated their worth, some in awe while others remained skeptical. Suddenly, The hero caught a frantic message from Asuka. She warned him of a predator stalking the prize and told him to watch his back. Rina realized she looked like a common thief standing before the prize. She didn't want it to come to violence, but her back was against the wall. She planned to strike when he least expected it to cripple him. Stick around for the next chapter, hit the bell, and see you soon on Tap's channel.